The master stared at the book while the boy tried to attack him. He asked if he hadn't eaten enough. The master's cultivation had reached the ninth rank of the Holy Sword, and right now he was training Xiao Bai. The guy fought off his master's attacks, but it was very difficult for him, and he had to put in a lot of effort. The master said that since Xiao Bai couldn't stop even one of his hands, he wasn't training enough and reminded him that he needed to put in more effort. The boy's eyes lit up, and he was filled with determination. He gathered all his strength and screamed to overcome the enemy's attack. And at that moment, Xiao Bai was able to repel the other's attack, and his entire body was enveloped in energy, and he made a breakthrough. The master closed the book and said that Xiao Bai had finally broken through to the ninth rank of the Holy Sword. The boy felt immense strength. The master said that at his age, he had improved faster, and that now the boy would face real challenges. The master broke through to the ninth stage 300 years ago and still hasn't surpassed the threshold. And no one on the continent has reached the 10th rank for a long time. The master began to say that the guy must be strong in heart and first prepare his mind for difficulties. But Xiaobai was already at the center of a huge amount of energy and was making a breakthrough to the sword god level. A huge beam of energy was directed straight into the sky and hit a mountain that stood nearby. The air around the boy was filled with lightning and energy. Xiaobai held a sword in his hands and was about to strike. So the boy took a step forward and slammed his sword into the ground, releasing even more energy. The master watched this and could not believe that his student had reached the 10th rank so quickly. Due to the enormous force of the impact, the mountain it hit began to rapidly collapse. At that moment, Xiaobai heard the screams of his master, who said that the student was planning to kill him. The man stood on shaking legs and asked for the energy to be dispersed quickly, otherwise he would not last long. The master began to laugh and say that the boy was worthy of being his student and would not have achieved this without the master's instructions. Xiaobai was surprised because the master had spoken of difficulties and that after 300 years he had not broken through, but the boy had not encountered any obstacles. The master yelled at the boy to shut up and not dare teach him. Xiaobai apologized and didn't know how he'd achieved his success. After this, the boy was forced to cook. Xiaobai believed that his masters would surely be punished by heaven for this. Xiaobai finished preparing dinner and went to the table to give the dish to the master. But instead of the master, he found a note on a tree. The master said he had taught him everything, and now it was time to part ways. The boy was shocked when he read that he was offered to find another master at the Elvia School of Magic. Xiaobai called out to his master very loudly, and his cry echoed throughout the endless mountains. A group of different beings agreed that if the old man refused to return the holy beans, they would take his life. After that, they saw Xiaobai running not far from them and shouting for the master to wait for him. The man with horns realized it was the old man's disciple and asked where he was running. The white tiger was certain they were running away from them. The company's leader decided the tiger was right and ordered everyone to follow him. And so the chase for Xiaobai began. The boy moved quickly forward, continuing to shout loudly and call for the master. He asked where he was, but there was no answer. Suddenly, Xiaobai heard someone screaming for help behind him. He turned and listened to the cries. The girl pressed herself against a tree and begged the bandits not to approach her. But the armed men weren't about to listen. The guys came closer and said that they did not look like bandits and would be gentle if the girl obediently followed them. The girl said that she was the granddaughter of the head of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce, and that if they tried to harm her, there would be consequences. The bandits laughed and said that it was worth sleeping with her, especially since they had already captured the caravan. The girl pressed herself against a tree and screamed for help again with all her might. The bandits said there was no one there, and her efforts were in vain. The girl tried to defend herself from the approaching bandits, and just at that moment, Ye Xiaobai appeared nearby. The guy decided he needed to smile and say hello first, which is why he attracted the bandits' attention. The bandits turned to the boy and were very displeased. They asked where he came from and if he wanted to save her. Xiaobai showed a portrait of his master and said that he just wanted to know if they had seen the man. The bandits were sure that the guy was using this as a trick and were aggressive. Xiaobai bowed and apologized for interrupting. He said they could continue now, leaving the bandits quite surprised. One of the bandits approached the boy and noticed that he was quite thin and delicate. The second guy laughed at his brother. Xiaobai pointed back and asked what was flying there. But the bandits didn't believe him, thinking he was simply trying to trick them. The boys were laughing at the guy's stupid tricks when a huge fireball appeared behind them. The tree the girl was sitting under broke, and she covered her ears, pressing herself against the stump and could not understand what was happening. There was a huge amount of fire all around, and everything was flying in all directions. And the girl thought she would die here. Tiger said the boy could have died, and then they wouldn't have known where the old man was. The other man apologized for his lack of restraint. The girl realized that she could hear sounds around her and opened her eyes, realizing that she had miraculously remained alive. Xiaobai asked why they were flying so fast and said that it was dangerous to fly at such a high speed. And then he pointed to two skeletons and said that these good-natured uncles died because of them. The man with horns, since he was able to defend himself from this attack, is worthy of being a disciple of the Holy Sword. And then he demanded that Ye Xiaobai tell them where his master had gone. White Tiger noticed that the boy's cultivation was at the level of a sword emperor, and he could handle him alone. The winged boy became worried and said his attack would seriously harm the sword emperor. But the leopard believed he wasn't strong enough. The girl saw 5 sacred animals, because of which people did not dare to go into the mountains for 1,000 years. But they hadn't been seen for a long time, and now they showed up for the guy. Xiaobai asked for an apology for what he had done. The white tiger told the boy not to change the subject and to tell where the master who stole their treasure was. Xiaobai asked what these sacred beans were. It turned out they were treasures of heaven and earth, essential for breaking through to the divine realm. And the chief beast said that only 2 beans could grow in 5,000 years, so they were extremely valuable. The white tiger said that the old man took the sacred beans 3 days ago. He lied to them and did not pay for them. Lord Tiger approached Xiaobai and said that if they did not give up the beans, he would show them what it was like to live while wishing for death. Ariana greeted the sacred animals and pushed the guy away, asking him to let her ask him. The white tiger calmed down a little and allowed the smart girl to take the guy away and talk to him. Ariana whispered that the animals were looking for another person, so the guy might be lying to them. She asked him not to anger the animals. Xiaobai said that the master was going to go to Elvia's magic school and find something there, so they needed to go north. The white tiger asked what they would do next. The boss turned to leave, saying they would follow him. The sacred animals were leaving when Xiaobai asked if the beans looked like they were the size of potatoes, shiny and speckled. Ariana panicked and asked why he was telling them this if it was better for them if the animals left sooner. The boss stopped and turned sharply to the boy. He asked if Xiaobai knew where his master kept the sacred beans. Xiaobai awkwardly rubbed the back of his head and said that the master brought them 3 days ago, but he thought they were potatoes and ate them. Ariana watched as the boy told the sacred animals that he had eaten their treasures and thought he was a fool. The sacred beasts couldn't believe their ears that Xiaobai just went and ate their sacred beans. 5 pairs of eyes looked at the guy in rage and thought about what they would do to him now. Ariana tried to run away while Xiaobai was talking about how the strange taste made him doubt his culinary abilities. The leopard was so angry that he could no longer contain his anger. He concentrated his energy into his paw and charged. Ariana screamed and tried to run away from the place where a serious fight was brewing. The smoke from the impact began to clear, and the animals discussed whether they should have asked the guy first, in case he had any beans left. The smoke cleared completely, and Xiaobai told them that there were no sacred beans left because he had eaten them all. Ariana and the sacred animals were shocked that the boy was alive. The leopard couldn't believe the boy had dodged the attack. Xiaobai looked at the leopard and asked why he had to dodge such a sweet attack. The leopard shouted that the Sword Emperor would never be able to withstand his direct attack. Xiaobai said that he was not at the Sword Emperor stage, but the master asked him not to reveal his cultivation status. After this, the guy immediately became serious and confidently declared that he was now at the stage of the Sword God. The sacred beasts couldn't believe the boy was at the Sword God stage and looked at him in surprise. And then they couldn't stand it and started laughing because the guy could say such a stupid thing. Ariana said that he would not fool his opponents and offered to apologize, and the guy agreed that it was worth listening to the master. The white tiger cried with laughter and said that the Yulan continent had not appeared for many years. And while the tiger was laughing at his ridiculous attempt to deceive them, Xiaobai had already disappeared, and the tiger was pointing towards the stump and Ariana. Xiaobai flew from above and shouted that they were stupid if they considered themselves strong and thought that he was not strong enough. The winged boy realized with horror that Xiaobai's voice was coming from right above him. The guy shouted that they were just a bunch of animals who could talk, and he was ready to start a fight. And when Xiaobai struck, it was so strong that it caused an explosion of enormous force. The phoenix was defeated, and the sacred beast tried to understand how the boy had managed to defeat it so quickly. The guy was the source of a fiery whirlwind, and everyone around him began to realize that he was truly at the sword god stage. Ariana was surprised because countless geniuses had failed to reach the sword god stage, and this guy was very young. The boss was furious. He pointed at the boy and said that, no matter his stage, the sacred beasts would still tear him apart. The white tiger hesitantly noted that there were now only 4 of them, but the rest did not listen to him and agreed to attack the boy. The leopard ran forward and shouted at the boy not to hide and to fight him on equal terms since he was so strong. His eyes glowed blue, and his clawed paws concentrated lightning of immense power, and the leopard attacked with a scream. He sent all those lightning bolts straight towards Xiaobai, using all his sacred beast power for this strike. Ye Xiaobai stood his ground and made no attempt to hide. He could have parried a blow of such force with just one swing of his sword. So when the guy sent a blast of his energy towards the lightning beam, they dispersed, but Xiaobai's energy continued to move forward. The leopard was shocked to realize his powerful blow had been easily parried, and he himself was now standing in the way of a very powerful attack. The leopard came to his senses a little and managed to jump away in fear, barely dodging the guy's blow. He screamed in horror when he turned around and saw that Xiaobai's attack had split the mountain into 2 equal parts, as if it was nothing. The leopard froze and no longer wanted to engage in combat with the guy, because he realized that he could not even comprehend how big the gap was. The snake decided that it was necessary to use physical attack along with spiritual power, the most important thing being to concentrate the blow on one point. He was confident of success because he was able to greatly accelerate his body, and his impenetrable scales gave him an advantage. However, Xiaobai repelled the serpent's attack without even using his sword. The boy remained unfazed and remarked that the serpent was talking too much. At that moment, a white tiger appeared behind the boy and shouted that he had overlooked something. And then it attacked the boy with its claws. The boss saw this and praised the white tiger for having the foresight to hit Xiaobai in his blind spot. The boy remained standing with his back to the tiger, but he was perfectly fine. Smoke billowed around him, as the blow had been truly powerful. But instead of harming Xiaobai, the white tiger broke its claws and looked at its hands in panic. The white tiger was feeling terrible about his broken claws, and the boy turned to him and asked if he was a meow meow. The white tiger fell to his knees in front of the guy, and Xiaobai began to stroke him and call him meow meow. The boss saw this and couldn't believe that the guy actually dared to humiliate the sacred beasts. He shouted that he would not tolerate this kind of behavior from the guy because it was unbearable and began to appeal. A huge, powerful dragon tail emerged from beneath the man's cloak. Soon, it took to the air. The boss transformed into a huge dragon, roaring at Xiaobai from the air. He was furious and eager to engage in battle. Ariana was frightened, and Xiaobai admired the beautiful black dragon. White Tiger watched and thought that now everything depended on the boss. The black dragon soared even higher, and a tremendous spiritual force began to coalesce around it. The boy watched from the ground. Ariana screamed that the spiritual power was too terrifying and they needed to hide. But the white tiger couldn't believe the boss was going to use that technique. The black dragon opened his mouth and the lightning around him began to gather into one big ball, intertwining together. Xiaobai said that the dragon was worthy of being a leader since he could control so many lightning bolts, and asked if his tongue was going numb. Naturally, no one answered him, and the black dragon collected even more lightning to complete the technique. And when all the preparations were completed, he used the sacred beast's forbidden technique, which was called thunder breathing. A ball of lightning flew straight at Xiaobai. The white tiger tried to flee, but the boy managed to grab it by the tail and hold it close. Xiaobai took a stance and prepared to reflect the lightning ball that the black dragon sent at them. And then he raised his sword up and directed it towards the ball of lightning that the black dragon released at him. The dragon hovered in the air and continued to channel its spiritual power into the attack. Its attack seemed stronger than Xiaobai's. However, Ye Xiaobai had no intention of retreating and appeared confident in his abilities. He continued to channel his spiritual power into the lightning ball. The lightning ball and Xiaobai's spiritual energy met in the middle. The lightning ball absorbed the boy's energy beam. Xiaobai's spiritual power, concentrated into a beam of energy, destroyed the lightning ball from within and approached the black dragon's body. And in the next moment, Xiaobai's beam of spiritual energy completely dispelled the other party's attack and pierced the black dragon. After the spiritual power dissipated, the black dragon began to lose altitude. A huge hole appeared in its body. The black dragon opened its mouth slightly, and blood poured out of its mouth due to the huge wound on its body. Ye Xiaobai watched the black dragon fall and decided that since he had won anyway, he would save its life. On the other hand, Xiaobai understood that everything had happened because of him, since he had eaten those 2 potatoes. And the dragon fell with a crash. The leopard healed the boss and asked for forgiveness for their mistake. And the black dragon said he hadn't intentionally attacked the sword god. Xiaobai leaned on the white tiger and said that they must control themselves, regardless of whether they are humans or animals. The black dragon cried and said that they apologized for the 2 dead and sincerely thanked the guy for his forgiveness. Xiaobai stroked the tiger and said that the animals should somehow compensate him for such a mess, since words alone were not enough. The black dragon agreed and said they were willing to give him Meow Meow as a gift. But the white tiger couldn't believe it. The boy was overjoyed and began hugging the tiger, telling him that Meow Meow was now his pet. The tiger cried about being the all-powerful white tiger. Suddenly, the tiger heard a message in his head. The boss was telling him to be patient while they tried to kill Xiaobai again. The boss was very angry, so he asked the tiger to lure the boy into the western forest. He was sure the boy wouldn't be able to escape the forbidden zone. He said that now everything depended on the white tiger of the underworld. And after these words from his boss, the tiger was ready to do anything. He stood up on all fours and started wagging his tail when he suggested they go find the master. Ariana said he looked a lot like a dog. Xiaobai turned to the girl and asked her name and whether she would like to go with them since her companions had met with such misfortune. Ariana introduced herself and sheepishly said that if the guy insisted, she could go with them. And when the girl looked up, she saw the boy and the tiger leaving. They were getting ready to go and cook some fish for the white tiger. Ariana started running after them, screaming that she'd been forgotten. The sacred animals watched them go, and the leopard asked if their plan would work. But the boss told the leopard not to worry, since their great god lived in the western forest. The boys reached the western forest when night had fallen. The forest was shrouded in fog, and the branches rustled in gusts of wind. Ariana and the white tiger pressed themselves against the boy from opposite sides. Xiaobai told them it wasn't very comfortable for him to walk like that. The girl and the tiger trembled with fear. They asked the boy to be quiet because they heard the cries of the dead. Xiaobai asked his companions not to worry so much. He pointed upward and said that the sounds were made by birds. Ariana and the white tiger looked at the place Xiaobai was pointing to and were convinced of the truth of his words. On one of the highest branches, there actually sat a bird, singing melodies that reminded them of the crying of the dead. The girl said the pidiwa was very beautiful and asked what kind it was. But the white tiger didn't know and asked the boy. Xiaobai didn't have time to answer them because the bird turned its other side to them, and they saw that it was disfigured. White tiger and Ariana screamed in panic and fear, but Xiaobai stood calmly behind them. Because of the very loud cry of the tiger and the girl, all the birds that had been sitting on the branches left their places and surrounded them. Xiaobai examined the birds closely and said they were very cute, but his companions disagreed. Ariana covered her ears and screamed that these birds were watching them and they shouldn't have entered this forest at all. The white tiger trembled with fear and said he simply wanted to take a shortcut. He hoped his god would spare him. Xiaobai asked if they didn't like the forest. Ariana fell to her knees and screamed that it was pointless because they wouldn't get out. The boy reached for his sword and drew it from its sheath. He began to concentrate his spiritual power and said what they should have said earlier. After that, he made one blow and confessed to his companions that he also didn't really like this forest. The blow that Xiaobai dealt with spiritual power caused a huge wave of fire that burned everything in its path. The wave of fire moved deeper into the forest until it crashed into the mountain with a deafening roar. Xiaobai was pleased and said he'd solved the problems and that now they could move without fear. Ariana and the tiger couldn't believe their eyes. In the sky above the forest, among the thin fog and sparks, one could see a small orange ball. Xiaobai asked if his companions were feeling better now. Instead of a forest, there was a scorched strip of land before them. The white tiger began to cry because the forbidden forest had existed for tens of thousands of years, and the guy simply destroyed it. Sparks from the burning trees flew through the air as the boy said it was time for them to go. But the tiger began to resist. But his cries of not wanting to leave were interrupted by a sudden, strong gust of wind. Everyone looked up. A circle of spiritual power formed in the sky above them, and Ariana said she felt something bad was about to happen. The white tiger was delighted and thought that the god of beasts had finally arrived to them, and now their plan would work. A portal opened from the ball of energy, and a silhouette emerged. He asked how a pathetic boy dared to destroy his forest. Ariana realized they had entered the forbidden forest of legend, where even sacred animals are forbidden to enter. And the tiger watched everything from the sidelines. A huge black silhouette with horns and an axe began to scream, asking how they dared disturb the deity, and then he shouted at them that they would die and rushed to attack. The girl was very frightened, unlike Xiaobai. The deity swung his sword, which quickly grew in size and struck them from above without leaving the portal completely. The blow hit a wide area, and the white game was thrown to the side from the stone on which he was lying. The deity looked down carefully and understood that, despite the explosion of the area around, something had gone wrong. The deity tried to lower the sword and touch the ground completely, but felt resistance and realized that he could not do this. When the smoke and spiritual power cleared, the deity saw that the boy had stopped his sword. Xiaobai asked why he was so weak. The white tiger lay on the ground near the epicenter of the fight and tried to ask the god of animals to destroy the guy. But the tiger didn't have time to finish, because the deity became furious because the man called him weak. He raised the hand that held the weapon, put even more strength into it, and rushed into the attack again. However, Xiaobai was surrounded by a shield and said that he was giving the god 10 seconds where he could use all his powers. He started counting, but then asked God to forget about it. He said the enemy was too weak for that. And when the previous attack dissipated, he raised his hand with the sword up and directed his blow at the portal. God saw a powerful attack coming towards him and was confused because he had never seen anything like it before. Since the beast god didn't dodge because of the portal, the beam hit him straight, and the silhouette in the sky immediately disappeared. The sacred animals were returning, and the leopard wasn't sure they had done the right thing. The serpent said he hadn't meant to anger the god. The black dragon was sure that they should have prepared an offering, but they shouldn't have left the boy alive. Their conversation was instantly stopped when a very bright flash of light appeared behind them. A beam of light shot into the sky and illuminated everything around so brightly that it seemed as if it was not night outside at all. The animals turned around and realized the forbidden forest was in the same direction. The boss happily decided the boy was destroyed. But the leopard noticed that the beam was emitting the boy's energy. The dragon released the unconscious phoenix, dragging it along with him, and he realized the leopard was right and that Xiaobai had created the beam. Their plan had failed, and the dragon couldn't believe it. After a while, the beam of light faded, and the area was once again illuminated by the moon and stars. Everything became very quiet. Xiaobai said that he must have become too strong since he managed to awaken her with one blow, and Ariana couldn't believe what had happened. And while she was asking if it was really a god, Xiaobai noticed the tiger was nowhere to be seen. He turned to look for it, and he saw that the white tiger was trying to sneak away from them. He asked where Meow Meow was going, and the tiger rushed to hug Xiaobai. He thought that the guy was very strong and the only way out was to travel with him. Their happy atmosphere was interrupted by a loud voice asking how the boy dared to destroy his divine body. A huge portal began to appear under the boy's feet, and a voice shouted that it would teach him a lesson. The portal then disappeared, but a hole formed beneath them. Ariana and the white tiger panicked as they fell into the unknown. They screamed and flew down for a very long time. The hole turned out to be too deep and seemed to lead to another world. Soon they were thrown through another portal. White Tiger and Xiaobai suffered painful injuries from the fall, and the girl used magic to help herself. Ariana ran to the guy and apologized for the fact that her magic control was too low and she couldn't help them. Xiaobai said he wasn't injured and raised his head to look around. He was very surprised. There was a huge number of different bones ahead, and huge swords were sticking out of the ground. Xiaobai continued to sit on the ground, looking around. Then he asked his companions where they had ended up. The boy rose from the ground and began to walk forward, stepping on bones. He asked if this was really an ancient battlefield. Ariana told him she'd read about a war between demons and gods 10,000 years ago. Xiaobai concluded that this was the site of that battle. The guy was unhappy and didn't understand why they were kidnapped and sent to this strange place. The girl said they needed to get out somehow, and the guy suggested making another hole. Tiger wasn't sure that was a good idea. But Xiaobai was determined to try to get out of this place in this way and hit the ceiling. However, despite all its force, nothing was damaged, and the only trace of the impact was smoke. Xiaobai tried again, but realized that there was some kind of barrier in this dream that was blocking his attacks. Ariana was worried that even Xiaobai couldn't break the barrier, and the tiger kept looking back, waiting for the dragon god. The guy stood on a huge skull and said that he would definitely come up with something, but asked the guys to stay away. When he finished speaking, he saw Ariana and the game pointing at something behind him in a panic. Xiaobai turned around to see what had scared them so much and was very surprised when he saw it. Right behind him was a huge dragon skeleton that was overflowing with spiritual power. Xiaobai was impressed because he never thought he would see a moving skeleton. Ariana screamed that the skeleton was possessed by a spirit and asked if it could be the dragon god who disappeared 1,000 years ago. The white tiger was very happy and mentally asked the Lord Dragon God to save his fellow tiger. A huge skeleton lunged forward. Xiaobai dodged, and the beast crushed the skull he was standing on. After that, the skeleton opened its mouth and started shooting balls of energy at the guy while Xiaobai was still in the air. The guy didn't expect that the enemy would need so little time to carry out such an attack, and he understood that he wouldn't be able to dodge it in a jump. The white tiger ran to the girl and shouted that it was the dragon's explosive breath, so they needed to lie down. Then a deafening explosion echoed through the air, right where Xiaobai had been a second ago. Ariana and the white tiger lay on the ground, covering their heads. The girl created a magical barrier to protect them. Ash and sparks flew around Ariana, but the skeleton no longer attacked, and the girl looked up. She looked at the fire and thick smoke in front of her and asked the tiger where Xiaobai was. Because of the smoke, they couldn't see anything. After that, a skeletal head appeared from the thick smoke, but Xiaobai was still nowhere to be found. The white tiger was overjoyed and began to shout that the dragon god had finally won, which greatly surprised Ariana. But then the skeleton's head fell to the ground, the smoke cleared, and they saw Xiaobai asking why Meow Meow was happy. The white tiger couldn't believe that there was an unharmed guy standing on the skeleton's head after such an attack. The tiger fell to the floor, and Xiaobai asked if he was hurt. But the girl explained that his faith had been shattered. A strange voice intervened in their conversation, saying that it now understood why the boy behaved the way he did in the forest. A purple cloud of energy appeared next to them again, and a voice said that Xiaobai was really worth paying attention to. The white tiger immediately came to his senses, and was surprised that the dragon god had only just appeared. Ariana found this behavior suspicious. Xiaobai looked towards the portal and asked in surprise who this voice belonged to. The portal revealed the face of a man with thick red eyebrows, a mustache, and a beard. He allowed himself to be called Lao Chu. Then the armored man emerged from the portal. His hands were clawed and his head was horned. He was the dragon god. Xiaobai bowed and apologized for disturbing him. He asked them to leave as he was in a hurry to see his master. The man said that it was possible, but he was bored here, and the guy was a worthy opponent with whom he would like to fight. Xiaobai was surprised and realized that the man also could not get out because of old age and asked if he was lonely. An awkward silence fell between them as the dragon god did not answer the question. After this, the man put down his sword and said that he would fight with the Qinggang sword, which he had received after defeating the Sword Saint. Ariana noticed the man hadn't answered his previous question, but the tiger was certain the god wasn't lonely. Xiaobai decided to tell them about his sword too. He said its name was Xiaohei and that he had found it at the foot of the mountains. The dragon god shouted that it was time to start the battle and threw Qinggang towards the boy, attacking him. The sword flew straight toward the boy, as the dragon god could control it from afar. Xiaobai stood motionless. He looked at the approaching Qinggang and prepared to parry the blow when it got close enough. Xiaobai chose the right moment. He struck, and Qinggang was shattered into tiny pieces right in front of him. The dragon god was delighted with such an interesting opponent and prepared to test him further. Xiaobai agreed to play and said he hoped the man would tell them about the exit when they were finished. Lao Chu began to laugh loudly and said that he was very interested and was ready to start the fun. 4 more swords with different elements appeared in the air, and Lao Chu was about to attack the guy with all his swords. He shouted that he was attacking, and swords of fire, ice, earth, and thunder flew out to attack Xiaobai. Ariana screamed about the legend that the dragon god collected swords from his opponents with different elements, and if the sword collides with the opposite element, the sword will shatter. Xiaobai struck the fire sword, and it shattered. After that, he easily parried the thunder sword's blow and shattered it as well. This surprised Lao Chu. A sword with an earth element appeared right in front of the guy, but it also shattered into pieces from Xiaobai's strike. The only hope left was the ice element sword, but it too was defeated in a fight with the guy and his sword. Lao Chu was shocked because the guy defeated all the swords, which meant that Xiaobai had the rarest dark element. The boy shouted that he knew nothing about it, but Xiao He had a good sword. Lao Chu was delighted and said he was surprised. A sword began to appear in his hands, which was the only weakness of the dark element, and he was glad that he would complete the collection. Lao Chu shouted that with the Sword of Light he could defeat Xiaobai and ordered the boy to continue the fight. Ariana was outraged that the dragon god had taken into his collection a sword that was useless in all battles except this one. But Xiaobai was not going to retreat because of this, and ran towards the dragon god to continue the fight. Lao Chu swung his sword and shouted that he was going to attack from above and cut the guy's sword. Ye Xiaobai and Lao Chu met with swords, and a very bright light began to emit from their blades. The collision created an explosion that sent the opponents scattering in different directions. Xiaobai used his hand to slow himself down and shouted that Lao Chu was very strong. The man laughed and said that the guy should give it his all before he loses. Since the dragon god said that he hadn't enjoyed a fight this much in a long time, Xiaobai said that he was very proud of himself. Lao Chu placed his sword before him again, ready for battle, and asked him not to let him down. But he didn't see that the sword had cracked. The next moment, the tip of the sword fell off and fell to the ground. Despite being stronger than only the dark element, Lao Chu looked at his feet in shock, where a piece of his weapon lay, and couldn't believe it. His sword of light was unable to cope with Xiaobai's power and began to fall apart right in his hands. The dragon god looked at his weapon in panic, not knowing what to do next if even this sword couldn't do the job. The man fell to his knees in front of the piece of the sword and began to scream that the ancient sacred sword of light had been damaged. Xiaobai said that this was apparently not enough for victory and ran to Lao Chu to continue the fight. The dragon god stopped his attack and began asking the boy to wait and not attack him. The white tiger was happy and supported Lao Chu, and Ariana noticed that Meow Meow did not understand what was going on. Xiaobai struck again, and another piece of the sword of light broke off, causing the man to panic. The dragon god began to scream when he saw that only the hilt of the sacred sword of light remained in his hands. Yes Xiaobai swung for another blow and asked the man to let him know when he gave up. He then struck the unarmed Lao Chu with such force that the man's dentures flew out. Ariana watched the fight and was amazed at what Xiaobai had done even against the sword that had the advantage. The white tiger realized that the dragon god was losing and began to cry because he could not help in any way. But despite this, the white tiger decided that he would still support his master until the very end. The dragon god hid behind a large rock and started shouting that the boy had knocked out his dentures and angered the old man. The boy asked Lao Chu if he wanted to continue. He said he would use the forbidden curse. The girl and the white tiger began to shout at Lao Chu not to do this, as it would not work. But the dragon god was not going to retreat and began to make a call to the Lord of Light. Ariana felt tense and was very worried about how this battle would end. The white tiger also froze and waited to see what Lao Chu's strongest forbidden curse looked like. Ye Xiaobai watched the old man's actions closely and expected to see another strong attack. But instead of the amazing performance they expected, they were met with complete silence. Ariana asked what had happened. And then they saw an old man running away who asked them to wait until he recovered. The girl asked if it really was the ancient dragon god. Xiaobai said he didn't know, but it was interesting. The boy decided that he would try to break this barrier again when the white tiger called him to the exit. Ariana and Ye Xiaobai turned in surprise at the sound of the tiger's voice. The boy asked where he found it. Meow Meow happily pointed to the wooden sign with the word exit and showed the hole under the skull. The boys asked if the white tiger himself had written the sign, because the ink was still fresh. Xiaobai moved the skull away and saw that there was actually a hole there, and although it looked suspicious, it was worth trying. The girl asked what if it was a trap. The guy jumped down, saying that then they'd see what it was like. Ariana said that the guy shouldn't blame them later if he really does fall into the trap. The dragon god held a brush and a bucket of paint in his hands and was preparing to show the boy his wisdom. Xiaobai, Ariana, and Meow Meow found themselves at the bottom of a pit, surrounded by a strange blue room. In the center there was a stone, from which some blue lines extended, and around it there was a huge seal drawn. White Tiger said he knew he needed to activate the stone with his inner energy. Xiaobai wanted to do it himself. But the White Tiger said that he was one of the sacred animals and now wanted to show what he was capable of. Meow Meow touched the blue stone with his paw and said that it would simply pour in some internal energy. The light suddenly turned pink, and the white tiger screamed that this thing was quickly sucking out his energy. The pink light grew brighter, and the white tiger began to scream as the energy rapidly drained into the stone. The boy and girl started running towards him, and Ariana said they needed to stop it immediately or he would die. Xiaobai ran up to the white tiger and began to pull him hard towards himself, but Meow Meow said that the formation was about to break. The guy wanted to destroy the stone pillar, but Ariana said that something terrible could happen then. The girl noticed that the pole was gradually catching fire, and they needed to pour more internal energy into it to get out. Xiaobai said that it would be easy for him, despite the fact that it required a lot of internal energy. Ariana couldn't believe what she heard and didn't understand how simple it could be. Xiaobai stood behind Meow Meow and said he would help him. The boy touched the tiger's back and began transmitting energy. The white tiger sensed the alien's internal energy and screamed even louder than before. Ariana saw that the stone pillar continued to light up and shouted to the guys that everything was working. Xiaobai transferred even more internal energy to the white tiger and said that he was ready to give as much as he wanted, even all of it. The seal around the stone pillar was almost completely glowing pink, and Ariana shouted to the guys that there was very little left. And after a short period of time, the entire seal was glowing with a bright pink light and was filled with someone else's internal energy. When they finished printing, the stone pillar lit up with a golden light, and the boys were happy that they had succeeded. Xiaobai was worried about Meow Meow and asked how the tiger was feeling after such an ordeal. The white tiger felt very tired and was shaking all over, but told his owner that he was fine. The dragon god watched as a bright blue light burst through the pit where the exit was located. He cried from the realization that after 10,000 years, he would finally be able to leave this terrible place. The stone pillar glowed with a bright blue light after enough internal energy was poured into it. And then an illusion of a man appeared who was laughing at the dragon god. He asked how long he had been sitting there. The man said he hoped Lao Chu had become kinder to people after all this time. The boys listened to the message in surprise. Ariana realized that this man had imprisoned the dragon god and was a very powerful man. The message was coming to an end, and it turned out that all that was needed was to say the command to return to Earth. And the man cried out solemnly that the dragon god must be told, "Papa Will, I beg you, let me go." The boys felt very awkward, and everyone thought this man was cruel. Xiaobai felt awkward, but he knew that this was the only way to leave this place, although he didn't want to say such a thing. And just as he was about to say this, the dragon god called them, and the boys turned towards the sound. Lao Chu looked very sad and said that he had not come to fight, but to ask if they would take him with them. The dragon god promised to be in their debt if they took him with them. And the boys were at a loss. But they quickly pulled themselves together and realized what they needed to do. They looked at each other and smiled slyly. Xiaobai approached the man and said that they were friends, so they would help him just like that without any debt. The guy became serious and said that he had a request with which Lao Chu could prove his sincerity. The dragon god was willing to do anything since the guy was so kind and was going to take him with him. Xiaobai said that the request was not at all difficult and Lao Chu just needed to read something out loud. The guy pointed to his friends, who were holding pieces of paper with a password that would allow them to leave. The dragon god read that he would have to beg Will to let him go and he couldn't believe it. He became very angry, but Xiaobai said that there was nothing difficult about it, shouted out one sentence and was released. The dragon god's eyes glowed red, and the man started screaming at him to shut up and not to dare ask him for such a thing. Xiaobai became serious and asked if the dragon god was unwilling to fulfill such a simple request. The guy raised his sword and said that then they leave Lao Chu here and asked how he dared to yell at him. The man apologized and said that he lost his temper when he remembered his battle with the strongest man. He spoke with tears in his eyes about the loneliness he had experienced throughout all these thousands of years. And then he cried harder. Xiaobai consoled the old man, saying that he just needed to say those words, and they would go outside. Meow Meow and Ariana watched this, and the girl said that sometimes it seems to her that the guy is worse than any demon. The tiger agreed with her, and Lao Chu mentally decided to leave all the grievances behind and escape to freedom. He thought about how he no longer wanted to remain the invincible dragon god. He wanted to leave this place and enjoy life. So, despite all his resentment, Lao Chu pulled himself together and cried out. He begged Will's dad to let him go. Xiaobai hugged the crying dragon god and said that he could cry some more, and then it would become easier. After these words were spoken, the stone pillar activated and blue lightning shot towards the ceiling. Xiaobai happily grabbed Lao Chu's hand and pulled him towards the exit to the real world. The dragon god looked at the sunlight and couldn't believe that he could smell that wonderful scent again. It was the smell of freedom, and the man ran towards it with joy, leaving his cage. When all the imprisoned people left this place, everything around lit up with a bright white light and soon disappeared. The dragon god stood in the middle of the forest. He looked around, unable to believe he had escaped to freedom. Xiaobai appeared behind him, carrying the girl on his shoulder and tugging at the tiger's tail. It turned out they had lost consciousness. The dragon god asked the boy not to leave and began searching his sleeves for a gift. Lao Chu said he wanted to thank the boy. The gift turned out to be a guardian spirit ring, which the old man discovered on an ancient battlefield. Xiaobai accepted the gift. He said it wasn't necessary but thanked her anyway. After this, the guy began to leave, taking his friends with him, and said goodbye to the old man. The dragon god watched with a smile as the young sword god walked away, thinking about what he would meet on the way. Ariana began to slowly open her eyes and very slowly come to her senses. The girl sat on the tiger's back and asked what had happened. Xiaobai explained that she had lost a lot of strength during the crossing. Ariana asked where the dragon god was, and the guy said that the old man decided to stay in the mountains for now. The girl was listening to the guy when she suddenly felt a strange wave of magic approaching them. The magic moved very quickly, and with each second, they had less time. The girl shouted at the guy to hold his breath and that they were being attacked by bandits. But it was too late, because the next moment an explosion occurred around them. Ariana screamed that her caravan was stopped by a similar magical smoke that affects the human psyche. She put a shield around him and asked him not to inhale it, but she turned around and realized it was too late. The sword god and the sacred beast were fast asleep. The girl thought it was unfair that he had been stopped with a magic scroll. Ariana felt the bandits approaching and knew that her strength was not enough to stop them. She decided to pretend to be asleep and hope that the bandits would not kill indiscriminately. Almost immediately, a crowd of men appeared among the trees and approached their victims. One of them was very pleased when he saw who they had caught and said that they were lucky to have come across a woman. The bandits were curious about the tiger and the boy's origins. They assumed they were protectors. At first, they wanted to take only Ariana, but then they realized that they could take everyone and make money. Ariana thought about their words and tried to understand who hired the bandits specifically to find her. There was a huge skull on the street. It was surrounded by a fence in some places, and there was a fire for lighting. The man invited his friend to dinner, but the guy reminded him that the boss had ordered him to keep an eye on the prisoners. The man said that he would leave alone then, but the boy ran after him because he did not want to be left alone and was also hungry. Ariana and Xiaobai remained lying behind bars, but now there was no one in the corridor to keep an eye on them. When the girl realized that their guards had gone far enough, she carefully opened her eyes. And after that, she immediately began to wake up Xiaobai, because only in this way did they have a chance of salvation. The guy was fast asleep and only complained in his sleep when the girl shook him violently. Ariana decided to use a trick and whispered in the guy's ear that while he was sleeping, she found his master. It worked instantly, and Xiaobai immediately opened his blue eyes, as if he hadn't slept a second ago. He sat down on the floor and started shouting for the girl to show him where the master was. But Ariana covered his mouth with her hand and asked him to be quiet. After that, she told him what had happened. Xiaobai couldn't believe they'd been caught by bandits. The boy realized he didn't have his sword and asked if Meow Meow had escaped. It turned out the sword had been taken, and the tiger was locked away somewhere else. Xiaobai thought this was outrageous and was about to free them with spiritual power, but the girl stopped him. Ariana explained that she had heard from the bandits that her caravan had been deliberately attacked, and that if she waited a little, she might be able to find the culprit. Xiaobai looked at the girl in surprise and asked why she was alone if an entire caravan had been attacked. The girl said that she was from the #1 Chamber of Commerce, and when they were driving through the mountain pass, they were ambushed. The bandits used magical fog to incapacitate the guards, and only she was able to escape. The girl knew if her Uncle Brewster was alive. Ariana was shaking and saying that she had to find the traitor who leaked the information and take revenge on him for everything. That's why Ariana wanted to ask the guy for help, but Xiaobai covered her mouth and said that someone was coming. Soon, several men appeared near their cage. One of the bandits told his deputy chief that they had caught them. The guy came closer to the bars, pointing at Ariana and asked if she was the one he wanted to catch. The deputy chief was wearing a mask. He folded his arms across his chest and said that everything was correct and he wanted to catch Ariana. He ordered the guy to take the girl out of the cell and take her to someone, and the guy began to open the cage. Two guys carried the girl away and started to leave with the boss. The man allowed the guy to keep Xiaobai. The guy was very happy. The deputy chief asked how long the girl would be unconscious, and the guy said about an hour. Ariana understood that she was being led to a traitor and hoped that Xiaobai would come to her aid in time. She hoped Xiaobai wouldn't fall asleep again. The man next to him was talking about how handsome he was. He turned his back to him and began to undress, anticipating the pleasure he would soon receive. But Xiaobai was already standing behind him. Having neutralized the bandit, Xiaobai took his clothes and was now adjusting his mask, which was very uncomfortable. Xiaobai didn't understand how the bandits wore them, because he couldn't see anything at all in this mask. Suddenly, a guy appeared from around the corner. He was carrying a small box and asked Lao Wang what he was doing there. Xiaobai panicked a little and lied about going there to pee. It was the only excuse he could come up with. Immediately after these words, the guy hurried to run away from the bandit, who knew the real owner of these clothes. The bandit watched as the guy quickly disappeared from his sight and thought that something was wrong. But then he decided that Lao Wang was simply enjoying the handsome guy they had caught. The deputy chief approached the house door and said he had brought Ariana. He asked them to come out and look. But the girl lay motionless on the ground. After these words, the door creaked open and a beam of light could be seen coming from the house. Ariana opened her eyes and tried to see from her place who exactly had ordered her to be caught. He was a grown man with a scar on the right side of his face. He promised to send a reward the next day. The deputy chief said he trusted Mr. Brewster, and Ariana realized it was her uncle. The man said that the girl would not be able to escape and ruin his plan, since the goddess of fortune had not turned her back on him. Ariana stopped pretending to be asleep and attacked Uncle Brewster with a wall of flame, preventing him from getting closer. The man laughed and said the girl was worthy of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce for daring to come in here for the truth. Ariana was very angry and was ready to use fire magic. She said she wasn't prepared for him to turn out to be a traitor. She wondered why he was doing this. The man said it was because of the old man, who had chosen his older brother's daughter instead of him. The man shouted that the old man had no right to choose a stupid girl over him. Ariana was shocked. The man blamed the old man for his rudeness and said that now he needed to get rid of Ariana. He suggested she do it herself. Ariana couldn't believe all these words and started screaming that Uncle Brewster couldn't do this to her. She recalled how, as a child, he took care of her, took her fishing, and taught her to ride a horse. The girl recalled how Uncle Brewster received his scar while protecting her on one of their journeys. But the man just looked at the girl arrogantly and told her that she was stupid and that this was all part of his plan. Ariana cried because she couldn't believe that all the care she felt from her uncle was fake. The man created a sword and ordered the girl to come to him, as he needed to return to the old man. But Ariana wasn't going to give her life to such a person so easily and began to attack with fire magic. Shobai ran down the empty street, trying to remember the girl's name and figure out where they had taken her. Just then, a few houses away, he saw a pillar of flame rise up and knew he had found her. Xiaobai decided that the girl was most likely in the same place where the fire was and began to run towards it. To make sure he didn't get lost, Xiaobai decided to take a straight line and destroy the buildings that were blocking his path. Soon, he heard a scream. It was Ariana. Her uncle had cut her shoulder, and she couldn't hold back a cry of pain. The girl started to retreat but stumbled. The man said Ariana was a burden to the Chamber of Commerce and should have been gotten rid of sooner. Uncle Brewster smiled broadly and told the girl that he was now going to correct his mistake. The girl sat on her knees and attacked the man with a fireball, but it was useless because the man dispelled her attack. Uncle Brewster was about to deliver the finishing blow and shouted at the girl to prepare for her end, but he was unable to complete what he had started, as a strong gust of wind forced him to thrust his sword into the ground in order to stay on his feet. And the next moment, the girl disappeared, and the bandits did not understand where she had gone so quickly. One of the bandits saw Xiaobai with a girl in his arms on one of the towers and pointed up to show everyone where she was. Xiaobai held the girl in his arms. He called her Aina and said he'd made it just in time. The bandits were surprised that Lao Wang was so quick and defending a woman. But their deputy chief realized it was someone else. He pointed at the guy and ordered him to confess right now who he was and what he was doing here. Xiaobai wanted to introduce himself and tell the bandits everything they asked, since they were interested. But Uncle Brewster appeared behind him and shouted at him to die no matter who he was. The blow from the man destroyed half the building on which Xiaobai stood with the girl in his arms. The deputy chief was angry that the man had destroyed their work and shouted at Brewster to compensate them for the destruction. Xiaobai managed to dodge the blow and was now carefully descending with the wounded girl to the ground among the trees. The man put the girl on the floor and asked if her own uncle was the traitor. Uncle Brewster happened to be nearby and said that it was foolish of the boy to act like a hero without understanding the situation. The man apologized to his sword and said that he would immediately feed Long Yin the boy's blood. Ariana recognized the sword that was stolen 3 years ago, causing losses to their guild and forcing her father to apologize personally. Uncle Brewster ignored the girl and told the boy to get his gun because things were getting serious now. Xiaobai said he'd look back now because he'd definitely seen her somewhere around here. Ariana asked what he was looking for. The guy walked away a bit, said he'd already found it, and bent down to the ground. Ariana couldn't understand what he'd found there. Xiaobai picked up a stick from the ground and proudly showed off his find to the other participants in the fight. The stick was long enough, and the guy introduced himself as Meow Meow and said that he was ready to start the fight. Ariana suggested he bury himself like a tiger or something similar. Her uncle was completely shocked by the situation. Uncle Brewster closed his eyes in irritation and said that it was time to drop the formalities and finally begin. The man started running, shouting that he would give Meow a quick death, pointing his sword straight at the boy. Xiaobai defended himself with a stick, and the man said that he was stupid if he hoped to win with a broken stick. Ariana was worried about the boy, saying that her uncle was a cultivation genius. She thought Xiaobai wouldn't be able to handle a regular stick. Uncle Brewster said that today he would demonstrate the technique that he had been training for almost half his life, and it would be an honor for the boy to die at his hands. The man raised Long Yin to strike with the Great Dragon Slash, and at that moment he was wounded by the opponent's stick. While Uncle Brewster was telling how stupid the guy was to rely on a broken stick, Xiaobai was able to calmly wound him. The man looked at the wooden stick sticking out of his chest and couldn't believe it. And Xiaobai stood in front of him, still wearing the bandit mask, and said that the man was too weak. Uncle Brewster's mouth started bleeding and he wanted to say something to Xiaobai. The man fell to the ground and called the guy names, and Xiaobai was unhappy that the man was swearing in such a situation. Xiaobai handed the sword to Ariana and told her to take it. The girl thanked him for saving her. Suddenly they heard the deputy chief's voice. He ordered them to put the sword on the ground and not go anywhere. The bandit said that Brewster had not paid, and now the girl had to pay the ransom herself. Ariana looked at the bandits doubtfully and asked if they were sure that the three of them wanted to attack. The deputy chief laughed and asked the girl to look around, because they were in the center of the base. After this, the man ordered the sixth to call people, and Ariana, and the guy looked around in surprise. The man said that their goats are the number, and even if Xiaobai is a master, he will not be able to defeat them all. The man laughed loudly, but when he turned around, he saw that there was not a single new bandit around. The bandits couldn't understand why no one was coming and thought that everyone was sleeping. But in fact, Xiaobai destroyed all the houses while he was going to save the girl and wounded almost all the bandits. Xiaobai easily dealt with the 3 remaining bandits, and they begged him for mercy. The guy leaned over to the boss and told them to immediately return Meow Meow and the sword. The chief had the dark sword. The tiger, it turned out, was cooking in the kitchen. Xiaobai was furious when he realized they were trying to eat him. Suddenly, Xiaobai sensed something very dangerous and realized that it was approaching the girl. He abandoned the bandits and ran to shield Ariana. A lightning bolt struck Xiaobai in the back. The girl became very worried when she saw smoke coming from the guy's back and didn't realize that he was wounded. The bandits were glad that their boss had returned and asked him to help them deal with the guy as soon as possible. The bandit chief was a very tall man, wearing enormous armor. He held Xiaobai's dark sword in his hands. The man was very angry that the base would be destroyed and said that he would crush everyone's bones so that they would feel like living corpses. The man couldn't say anything else because he was surrounded by the bright light of Xiaobai's spiritual power, and nothing remained of the bandit chief except the dark sword that belonged to Xiaobai. The sword began to fall from the roof, and the guy caught him with ease. And she angrily said that anyone who uses other people's things will be punished. He will deserve a hellish death. The bandits saw their boss defeated in a second and felt despair. The angry Xiaobai ordered that they take him to the kitchen and immediately bring him his scabbard. The bandits were already badly beaten and frightened, so they immediately agreed to carry out the order. Xiaobai opened the door that led to the kitchen and shouted that he would save Meow Meow. In the kitchen, he saw a white tiger lying in a large basin and not looking at all like someone who needed saving. Meow Meow was completely relaxed and resting in the water along with various spices. Xiaobai and Ariana froze. The girl said she thought the tiger was enjoying it. Xiaobai sniffed and said that it smelled very good, but the girl started yelling at him that he was imagining things. She said they needed to hurry and find the master. So the boy went to get the tiger. As they were about to pull the tiger out of the water, someone called out to the hero behind them. These were the three bandits who had carried out his orders. They knelt before him and begged him to stay with them. After that, they started actively bowing, bumping foreheads and shouting for the guy to become the boss. The bandits said that their ancestors had been farming near the mountains for many years. But a few years ago, bandits appeared. They burned houses, killed people, so they had to flee. Later, they met the chief and he was able to unite them to fight against the bandits. So all these people became bandits in order to survive. They had to take this path. The residents were able to defeat all those bandits and became the strongest group in the area under the control of the chief. But now that the other factions know the boss is gone, they'll try to eliminate them. Xiaobai felt uneasy. Xiaobai sat on the throne, and all the bandits begged him to become their leader. They bowed to him and hoped for it. The boy asked Ariana what to do. She thought it would be best to get rid of the bandits since they had killed all the caravan guards. The deputy chief stood up and said that they had not killed anyone except the chief guard and had simply locked them up. Ariana was delighted to hear that almost all the guards were still alive. She asked if it was true. It turned out they had indeed been locked in, despite Brewster's pleas to get rid of them. The guards were glad to see Ariana. Xiaobai noticed that all the guards were dressed only in their underwear. The girl was overjoyed to see the boys. She started crying when she realized they were actually okay, and she told them she was so happy. Ariana ran to the bars and said that she was very worried, and the guards replied that they were also worried about Miss. Xiaobai burst into tears when he saw such strong devotion, and the tiger asked the boy not to exaggerate. The boy wiped the tears from his eyes and called the deputy chief. He responded nervously at that very moment. Xiaobai said that since everyone was safe, he considered them good bandits. The men were touched by this title, and Xiaobai, with tears in his eyes, said that he was ready to stay with them and hoped that they could get along with each other. All the bandits were very happy about this great news and began to shout, praising their new leader. The long corridors were filled with happy cries and men glorified the white beast. The next day, Ariana asked if the guy would go on to look for his master. Xiaobai said that he wanted to take care of the bandits' safety first and asked the girl to be careful on the way. Ariana said that she would be happy to help him when she finished her family business and suggested that he come visit because he would be welcome. Xiaobai asked why her grandfather should be happy about his arrival, since they didn't even know each other. Afterwards, the guy waved goodbye to the girl and wished her a safe journey. Ariana was a little annoyed, so she shouted that the guy could stay with his bandits forever and quickly rode away on her horse. Xiaobai asked why Ariana hadn't said goodbye to him. Tiger couldn't believe the boy genuinely didn't understand. They were distracted from this conversation by a shout from one of the bandits, warning everyone that they were under attack. The guy stood on the tower and shouted that the bandits were 3 kilometers northwest of their possessions. The guy couldn't finish speaking because the bandits shot him in the chest and he fell. The alarm was immediately raised in the settlement, and the deputy chief said that they were being attacked by fire bandits. Xiaobai couldn't understand how they'd hit the guy from such a distance. The man explained that they had muskets. The wounded man was taken down from the tower and attempts were made to stop the bleeding. The fire bandits weren't as strong, but they had plenty of muskets. The deputy chief was sure that they had learned about the death of their chief, who could fight them, and had now come to attack them. The boss of the fire bandits said that the wind had disrupted the bullet's trajectory, and the guy did not die and was now suffering from pain. The man ordered his subordinates to move faster to save the boy from suffering. The deputy chief ordered that the entrance be blocked with large boulders to keep the fire bandits out. One of the bandits ran to the deputy and said that they could not block the entrance because the chief refused to come in. Xiaobai stood in the clearing in front of the huge skull, looking out for the fire bandits who were approaching them. The deputy told Xiaobai that he had gone crazy and would simply be shot, while another bandit decided that the chief did not know about the power of muskets. However, Xiaobai had no intention of listening to them and remained where he was when he heard laughter nearby. The boss of the fire bandits laughed and asked why the guy didn't hide. Had he really forgotten how to walk out of fear? The man asked if the Skull Gang members wore masks and assumed the guy was new to the group. Xiaobai listened to the man and said that he was indeed the new leader of the Skull Gang. The man laughed and said that the previous one had kicked the bucket the night before, and they had immediately chosen some weakling as the new one. Xiao Bai told the man to swear that the fire bandits would not come again, otherwise he would kill everyone. The boss of the fire gang did not immediately understand that the guy was seriously saying such things in his position, and was confused, and then he began to laugh loudly and fell to his knees to calm his merriment a little. After this, the fire gang boss stood up, raised his hand and snapped his fingers, giving his bandits permission. That's why the next moment a huge number of muskets appeared behind the boss, aimed at the guy. The deputy chief was very nervous and realized that it was all over, and the chief would definitely die from their muskets. The fire gang boss walked up to Xiao Bai and pressed the muzzle of his musket to the serious guy's forehead. The man said he would kill all the Skull Gang men and continued to press the muzzle of his musket to the man's forehead. And then he added that the guy could get down on his knees and beg, and then maybe they would let him go. Ye Xiaobai frowned and told the fire faction boss that they wouldn't succeed because he had promised to protect them. The guy said that he accepted the agreement with the Skull Gang, and his deputy cried while watching it. The deputy raised his weapon and called upon all his brothers to fight alongside the chief against the enemies. The fire gang boss said he accepted Xiaobai's answer and fired a musket at his head. But he missed because the guy seemed to have appeared in a different place in a second, and the bullet flew past. The Skull Gang members were shocked to see how easily their new boss dodged the bullet. Now the fire gang boss felt the tension rising and asked who Xiaobai was. Ye Xiaobai put his hand on his heart and said with a smile that he was the new leader of this gang, just as he had said before. The fire gang boss looked at the strange guy in front of him in confusion, who was going to protect his people. The man decided that the newcomer had just been lucky the first time, so he grabbed his musket and started shooting. However, Xiaobai remained motionless, unafraid of the shot, and the musket bent. Xiaobai said the man used force to intimidate and kill and must pay for it. The man looked at his weapon and couldn't understand how this was possible. He asked if the guy really had an iron head. The fire gang boss turned to run away and shouted that he would come back to deal with them. Xiaobai called out, "Meow, meow," and the white tiger instantly leaped out from its hiding place and headed after the man. The white tiger hovered in the air right above the fire gang boss and was very happy that he would finally be able to deal with someone. He asked the man where he was going and, using his enormous strength, pushed the man into the ground. The boss of the fire gang was covered in blood and shouted at his brothers to shoot and not to worry about him. The Skull Bandits panicked when they realized that a huge number of bullets were about to rain down on their boss, just like on them. The fire bandits fired simultaneously, without leaving their hiding places, and the shots created a lot of noise. The white tiger looked up and saw a huge pile of shells flying at him, and was a little confused. But Xiaobai appeared in front of him and shielded Meow Meow from the bullets. The boy reached for his sword, and he asked the white tiger to remember one important thing. The bullets were already very close to the boy. Then he drew his sword and deflected all the bullets with one blow. He said that anyone who tried to harm him would get what they deserved. The bullets changed direction and were lost in Xiaobai's spiritual power. It all happened too quickly. Xiaobai was still standing in front of Meow Meow, and his punch, along with the bullets, flew further and further into the distance. And then the guy realized that he had overdone it a bit and felt very awkward about how it all turned out. He missed by a little, and now a small mountain nearby is left without its top. The white tiger continued to hold the fire bandit boss's head, but allowed him to see how much power Xiaobai possessed. The man couldn't believe his eyes and couldn't understand how this was possible. But the tiger was delighted that someone shared his feelings. The Skull Gang bandits also watched with their mouths open at the abilities of their new boss. The tiger let go of the man, and he ran to call everyone to come out and greet the god, and Xiaobai said that the man had gone crazy. Tiger said that Xiaobai's strength was to blame for everything when they heard screams behind them. The men were delighted and said that they needed to destroy the rest of their opponents, and that with the new boss, they would have no need to fear anyone. They wanted to seize all the resources and destroy all competitors, but Xiaobai angrily refused them. The men did not expect such a reaction from him, and immediately calmed down and looked at the new boss in surprise. The guy said that he stayed only for protection, and they should be kind and not bloodthirsty bandits. The deputy chief listened to Xiaobai's speech and asked if they could rob, but the guy angrily said that they couldn't. The deputy chief awkwardly asked what kind of bandits they would be if they did not rob and also had no food. Xiaobai thought about it while the men were saying that they would have to starve to death because the harvest would not be enough. The guy thought for a while, and then said that they could rob other bandits since they were robbing from others. The men listened to the new boss's proposal, but were not sure that it was the right thing to do. Xiaobai asked to be taken to the other bandits and said that it would be okay if they stole the loot. Night fell, and the Skull Gang led their chief to where the Wolf Gang lived. Their flag was flying on one of the hills. On the mountains near the large cliffs, there were many men with spears who were guarding their territory. Xiaobai greeted the men from the Wolf Gang, thus attracting their attention. He stood in front of the other men and asked the alien gang to give them all their provisions. The men recognized the Skull Gang and were surprised that they were so polite when they arrived, especially without a boss. The deputy introduced their new boss and said that Xiaobai would let them survive if they gave them the provisions. The Wolf Gang laughed and began to discuss how small their boss was and that they were very scared. Xiaobai listened as they were told they were not worthy of being pots and were given a chance to leave. And since the guy was so angry, the entire Wolf Gang was wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of moments. The herd's next target was a gang of wild boars. They weren't received very warmly and wanted to settle old scores. Xiaobai listened to other people's insults and couldn't help but get the bandits. So the gang of boars suffered the same unattractive fate as the gang of wolves. Meanwhile, Ariana had already reached home and was at the main building of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce. A servant came to Grandpa and announced that Miss Ariana had finally returned home. Ariana was dressed in a luxurious dress and happily entered the room to see her beloved grandfather. The grandfather hugged the girl and said that he was very glad that everything was okay with his granddaughter. Ariana burst into tears and told her grandfather that Uncle Brewster had betrayed them and conspired with the bandits. Grandfather said that greed was to blame for everything and promised that he would destroy all the guilty bandits. The man stroked the girl's head, and Ariana asked how exactly he wanted to destroy them. It turned out that the Cornus Empire would destroy the bandits with its army under the command of Prince Rice. The prince took 3 great mages with him on his journey, ensuring he would destroy them all. And Ariana was worried. The rabbit was at the edge of the path, which was the road near the mountains of demonic beasts. The rabbit was calmly eating tasty grass when he heard a strange and unusual noise behind him. When he turned around, he saw a huge army of people approaching him. They were on horses, dressed in armor, holding the flags of their kingdom in their hands, and confidently moved forward. The old wizard was outraged that they had been taken so far just to destroy common bandits. Prince Reyes said that Mitchell paid them a huge amount of money and also hired magicians for backup. In this vast mystical world, there is another group that cannot be mentioned, and that is the magicians. Unlike swordsmen who rely on their physical strength, mages work with their minds. A simple song can be enough to summon destructive power. The highest rank among magicians is considered to be the god of Dharma, followed by the holy magician, great, master, and ordinary magician. In the center, there is an ordinary magician, a senior, an average one, a beginner, and then a wizard and the lowest title of apprentice. For a small country, acquiring a great mage is tantamount to being granted divine protection, and against 3 mages, even a sword god wouldn't be able to win. The army came across the ruins of a place that had previously been a bandit hideout. Prince Race asked who had dealt with them and whether anyone else had been invited besides them. Prince Race called his 4 greyhounds and they instantly appeared before him. The man asked them to explore the area to see if there were any more bandits left, to find out if they were traveling in vain. The 4 gods were dressed all in black and wore masks. They immediately followed the order. The village, which was not far from the scene of the events, looked empty. Only a lot of bags lay in the center. The old man prayed for rain, because otherwise their village would perish without water and food. The man saw that there were huge bags of food lying right in front of his house. He was very glad that now they would be able to afford to eat a little. People who finally wanted to eat began approaching the bags in the center of the village. The men from the Skull Gang watched the villagers from the bushes and heard them enjoying the food. The men were glad to have made people happy on their boss's orders and admired his generosity. The deputy chief stood up from his hiding place and said that it was time for them to go to the next village. And when they were about to leave, they heard a man's cry and turned around. The men were shocked when they saw what had caused the loud scream. An elderly man was hit in the face, knocking out his teeth. He could have fallen to the ground from such a powerful blow. One of the 4 greyhounds was holding the old man down to the ground and holding a bag of food in his hands. The man in black asked the old man what the bandit's food was doing to him in his hands. One of the villagers told the men in black that he was wrong and that this food was a gift from God. The man in black, who was pinning the grandfather to the ground, threw a stone at the resident. The man's head started bleeding and he fell to the ground, and his daughter was very worried about her father. The man in black said that it was the last time to ask who brought the food here. The old man repeated that they didn't know what was going on. They were just poor locals. The man in black towered silently over the old man and then ordered that the food be returned immediately. The Skull Gang bandits watched the events unfold and tried to figure out what to do if the new bandits were taking people away. The deputy chief sent Lao Ju to the camp to report to the boss, while he himself was going to stop the men in black. The Skull Gang rode in carts and sang about their motto of not harming good people. The White Tiger threw alcohol to the men who continued the song correctly as a reward. Xiao Bai rode on the carriage and enjoyed his title as the greatest chief and the most powerful boss. Suddenly, a man ran out and shouted that something terrible had happened. The boy saw Lao Ju and asked why he returned alone after going to the village. The man said a group of bandits stole food from locals and also killed some of them in cold blood. The bottle of alcohol that the guy was holding in his hand broke because he was squeezing it too hard. Xiaobai was very angry and called his gang brothers to deal with these bandits. The Greyhound Four tied up men, children, and women. Do not pay attention to the children's cries. They returned to the prince's tent and reported that they had found the bandits' food and livestock in the village. Prince Race emerged from his tent with a girl in his arms, who asked if they were going to destroy the bandits hundreds of miles away. The villagers asked the principal to believe that they had not stolen anything, and that the bags of food had appeared on their own in the morning. The deputy chief told his friend that all was lost because they had an entire army standing in front of them. He pointed to the flag and said that it bore the royal emblem of the Cornish Empire. The deputy chief said that it was time for them to leave, because the army would start pushing back the bandits. The deputy chief was not looking ahead as he ran away, so he collided with an unknown man. This man turned out to be a magician who could smell the stench of dirty bandits even from a kilometer away. The prince and his girlfriend saw an explosion in the trees near where they were, and the man realized that the master had found someone in the bushes and sent officers there. The knights ran to the scene and saw two unconscious men who had already been dealt with by the magician. The old man said that the stupid people didn't even suspect that bandits were watching them all this time. The prince was glad that they had Poppy with them and asked them to check if there were any other suspicious individuals nearby. The deputy chief stood up, despite all the wounds on his body, and said that there were only two of them here. One of the four greyhounds struck the man on the legs with a sword and ordered him to bow to the prince. But the deputy chief did not fall to his knees. Despite the wounds, while blood flowed down his pants, he continued to stand. The man was very angry and asked the man why he should bow down to such people. And then he furiously told how they had asked the imperial family many times to save them, but no one listened. And now they're like bandits, wanting to be worshipped. Mac laughed at the bandit, and one of the members of the Greyhound Four raised his sword to strike and shouted for the bandit to accept his death. But Prince Race ordered him to stop immediately. He told the bandit he was giving him a chance to survive and fight him. The man in black gave the bandit his sword, and the prince said that if the bandit won, he would take the villagers and leave. The magicians were unhappy that the prince had started his game again, and discussed not wanting to see that scene again. The bandit gripped his sword tighter and was about to attack, while the mages simply closed their eyes so as not to see it. The deputy chief ran, despite his injured leg, to try to save the villagers. And the magicians kept discussing what record the principal had set the last time it cut the human body into pieces. And this time, Prince Race intended to chop this man into no less than 4,000 pieces. The guy who was with the deputy chief and was caught off guard by the magician began to come to his senses. When he opened his eyes and sat up on the ground, he could not understand what was happening around him and what had happened to them. He heard heavy breathing and saw the seriously wounded deputy chief, who was barely standing on his feet. The prince stood with his sword slung over his shoulders and said that he didn't even have to strain himself in this fight. The bandit saw that this man dared to harm the deputy chief and grabbed a stone and rushed to attack. The deputy chief began to shout at the man not to dare approach the prince, but he did not listen. Prince Race saw another beautiful victim suitable for his entertainment and smiled. After this, the man made several movements with the ball and chopped the huge stone into small pieces. And along with this stone, it completely cut the body of the man who was carrying it into even smaller pieces. The deputy chief was screaming. There were tears in his eyes, and he couldn't believe what had happened. The villagers also watched in horror at what the prince had done and covered the children's eyes. One of the magicians thought that blood and steel was a magnificent sight, while the others felt disgust. Suddenly, one of the magicians noticed that there was some object above, and it had a strange flight trajectory. The prince stepped on a piece of the previous bandit's body and said that now it was the deputy chief's turn. He would be very angry and understood that this was his end, so he mentally asked the boss not to be angry. Prince Race moved towards the bandit and prepared to cut him into hundreds of small pieces. But they didn't have time to get close to each other, because that strange flying object landed between them. Prince Race looked ahead in shock, unable to understand what had happened right in front of him. A large amount of smoke rose from the impact of some falling object, and sparks flew everywhere. The man had to cover his nose. It turned out that such a strong fall had created a hole in the ground, and when the smoke cleared, someone else's hand could be seen. One of the magicians said that the monster had strange claws, and the second corrected him and said that these were human hands. The deputy chief was crying and could not believe that the chief appeared in front of him at the last second. Xiaobai actually climbed out of the hole. He did it a little clumsily, but he still managed to get out. Because the guy had been singing about alcohol before, he was a little drunk, but he was serious. The prince laughed at this picture and said that not only was their leader a boy, but he was also drunk. Prince Race asked if the little leader wanted to fight him, and if he wasn't afraid, he should take out his sword. The man was confident that another easy victory awaited him and enjoyed his superiority, but his laughter was interrupted by a blow to the face, which caused the principal's teeth to fly out. He himself flew back while Xiaobai continued to fight him with his bare hands. The knights became worried because the prince was beaten by a drunkard and decided that the man had succumbed to the bandit. The deputy sheriff started screaming and asking the chief to take revenge for what the man had done to Shido. Xiaobai concentrated his spiritual power into his fists and continued to take revenge with pleasure for everyone this man had hurt. But Prince Race did not have time to react or attack in response, and the sword fell from his hand. And after a particularly strong blow from the sword god, he flew away and fell to the ground to the cries of his subjects. The knights screamed and were about to kill the drunkard who had attacked their highness. But the man did not let them do this and said that Xiaobai was the first one who dared to hit him. There was a huge bump on the principal's head. He was covered in bruises and had no teeth, but he screamed that it didn't hurt at all and he gave in. The magicians discussed the prince's iron will and the fact that he was just playing with the boy, which is why he allowed himself to be hit. The prince had the sword in his hands again and said that he would do this bandit the honor of dying from his secret technique. He channeled his spiritual power into the blade and prepared to attack with the 1,000 obsidian slashes technique. All these threads headed towards Xiaobai, and his deputy shouted at the guy to dodge immediately. But Ye Xiaobai took out his dark sword and easily cut through all of the prince's strings. Prince Race felt confused when he realized that the drunkard had cut his blow. He didn't understand how a person could so easily cut through the royal family's strongest technique. When I suddenly felt the technique of 10,000 cuts on myself and realized that this was not an ordinary bandit. The man's body began to crumble into small squares, and in the last moments of his life, he thought about the boy. Xiaobai shielded his deputy with his body so that he wouldn't accidentally fall under his next attack. The boy turned to the army and struck them with his powerful spiritual attack, destroying them all. The deputy chief looked at the guy's actions and realized that his chief had incinerated the entire camp. He thought uneasily that the boss was not usually so cruel, and then he saw that he was drunk. The mages defended themselves with barriers and tried to figure out how they would explain that the prince was reduced to ashes. One of the magicians told the second that since there was nothing left of the prince and the army was destroyed, they could not leave just like that. And the magicians prepared to use the forbidden technique to defeat Xiaobai. Seals began to form around the boy, and various letters flew around him, enclosing him in a cage. When Xiaobai looked down, she saw a huge seal, and his deputy shouted that it was a forbidden spell. The sword god asked the boy to step aside and said that he wanted to see what these old men were capable of. The deputy chief did not want to leave him in such a dangerous situation, but he was given no choice and was rudely pushed away. Several seals rose high into the sky, and a beam of enormous power passed through them in the center. The sword god was trapped in the forbidden technique of 3 mages and screamed in pain. The deputy chief understood that he couldn't help in any way, and all he could do was shout and call for the chief. After some time, the guy finally pulled out his dark sword, firmly grabbed its hilt, and raised it to strike. And then he easily cut through all the seals of the forbidden technique of the 3 most powerful magicians around him. The magicians were amazed at the enormous power possessed by the man in front of them. All of their seals were destroyed, and another huge golden beam appeared in the sky, surrounded by a small pink light. People in the city could see this color, and everyone was interested in what was happening and where it came from. People were whispering and asking what level of skill it took to reach such heights and create something like this. The master sipped his tea and was surprised that Xiaobai had made such a fuss, and realized that there would soon be unrest in the city. It was a huge tower that reached high into the sky, right up to the clouds. And at the very top of this tower was the High Council of Blag Dalu. Only birds could be seen in the windows on this floor. The council met for the first time in over 100 years and was now trying to figure out why they were there. The knight said that 4 members of the council were unable to attend, and that it was Lord Ba Sheng who initiated it. The council members were surprised and began to remember that the man had no intention of leaving the mountain until he reached the 10th rank of sword. Master Xiaobai sent a letter to the senior council, telling them that his disciple had reached the sword god level yesterday. The council members realized that this was the same guy the master had picked up 16 years ago. The elf said that this time was too little and suggested that the master had gone mad to give such a title to the boy. 2 more council members supported the elf and said that the master had always been strange and talked nonsense. They were discussing what they would do if the old master got angry and came here, when the whole room suddenly shook. The men couldn't figure out what was happening. Chamber of Commerce Chairman Mitchell suggested an earthquake, but a huge amount of light began to come in through the window on the top floor. And then the entire building was surrounded by the most powerful rays of spiritual power that belonged to the god of the sword. Someone thought it was a spell, but another man refuted this theory, saying that even 100 magicians could not do something like this. Now that every member of the council felt such a huge power around them, they thought that the news might be true. The elf raised his hand and said that he was putting to a vote to grant Xiaobai the title of Dark God of the Black Sword. The hands of all 4 remaining council members present at the meeting immediately went up. After which, with the help of the little dragons, they decided to send this to the guilds of the chambers of commerce of all countries. The news is that Master Basheng's 16-year-old disciple has been awarded the title of Black Sword Dark Block. One of the council members was about to put a seal on it, but the knight reminded him that it was not a portrait of the god of the Black Sword. Xiaobai felt very tired and yawned because he was very sleepy. He rubbed his eyes and wondered why all his clothes were torn. Then he noticed in front of him the enormous damage he had caused with his attack yesterday. The guy himself didn't remember when he had done something like this, so he was very surprised. He decided to leave the crime scene as quickly as possible, and he wondered how he got there and what he was doing there. As he was running away, he noticed that someone's legs were sticking out of the ground nearby, and this interested him. Xiaobai grabbed the man by the ankles and pulled him out of the pit. The man turned out to be his deputy. The boy let him go and asked him what he was doing there, if he had gone to distribute food to the villagers. The man caught his breath. And then he looked at his boss in surprise and couldn't believe that he didn't remember how he cut the earth and the heavens with his blow. The deputy told him that Xiaobai was drunk, but the guy didn't remember anything special about the previous day. By this time, the white tiger finally came running with the army of bandits. They were ready to fight. The chief was very surprised that they were planning to fight someone, since he didn't remember anything. The deputy began awkwardly explaining what had happened. Xiaobai pointed at himself in surprise and couldn't believe that he had incinerated an entire army without even remembering it. The deputy calmed down and said that all these people deserved to die, and the chief was simply saving him and the peasants. Xiaobai held his head and now understood why the master hadn't let him near the bar all this time. The guy said they needed more training and was going to go find the master. Well, his deputy panicked. None of the bandits wanted Xiaobai to leave them, and they begged him on their knees to stay. Meow Meow smiled contentedly and shouted to the bandits that he would be happy to help them and asked them not to worry. They soon found themselves next to an army of ants who promised to protect the gang at any cost. And in return, they asked him to put in a good word with the dragon god. The white tiger said he would definitely pass it on. After this, the white tiger moved closer to the main ant and asked him not to call him by name when Xiaobai was nearby. Afterwards, the tiger shed a tear because the sacred beast had turned into a domestic animal. The bandits could not believe that such powerful creatures served the white tiger, and now would also protect them. The deputy chief continued to cry in Xiaobai's arms and thank him for everything he had done for them. Afterwards, the deputy turned to his brothers and told them to prepare a party in honor of their friends. When night fell, they gathered in their headquarters and prepared to properly send off their boss. Everyone had full glasses of beer and was eating meat. Everyone was trying to have fun and not think about sad things. 2 guys brought in a huge bowl of food and told everyone to pounce on the chef's food. Xiaobai watched people quickly eat and praise his food and enjoyed it. The party was a success, and when dawn came, Xiaobai and the tiger were about to leave. but no one came out to say goodbye to them. The white tiger wanted to show them what it was like not to say goodbye to loved ones, but Xiaobai stopped him. He said that people were simply having a hard time saying goodbye, so they didn't come out to avoid upsetting them with tears. The white tiger turned to the boy and also shed a few tears in honor of such a strong male friendship. Xiaobai said that besides this, by not showing their weakness, they maintained their pride. The boy and the tiger left because men's farewells should not be in tears. Meanwhile, in the rooms, the men slept poorly because they had overeaten at the previous night's party. Soon they found themselves at the gate that led to the holy city of Elijah, where there was a long line. The guard asked the guy if he had an identification card and said that there was a fee for transporting animals. Xiaobai had never been to the city before and didn't know what an ID card and the silver coin that had to be paid with were. The knight handed the boy over to another employee and asked him to take the new guy to the city council. The knight walked a little ahead and asked why the city bothered with such poor people if it would be easier to drive them away. Xiaobai looked around in admiration and carefully examined all the beautiful places that caught his eye. It was the first time he had ever been in a real city and seen huge, majestic buildings. They approached a building called the Swordsmen's Association, and it was huge, and next to it was a stone statue of a knight. Xiaobai looked around with delight, and the patrolman ordered him to stand still and not go anywhere. The white tiger, now perched on his shoulder in the form of a small kitten, was indignant at this behavior. But the boy asked him to calm down. Meow Meow sighed heavily and said he should have taken some money with him. Screams could be heard from nearby. Two men behaved aggressively towards a girl and a child. They trampled the food the girl was carrying in her basket. When the girl and the child started to run away, the man in the hat told them not to attract unnecessary attention to themselves. He reminded his partner that he simply needed to be reminded how many people were in the Swordsmen's Association. And then the Dark Lord will be satisfied. The man turned forward to continue walking and accidentally bumped into Xiaobai. His partner immediately became very angry and started shouting and demanding that the guy apologize. Xiaobai turned to him excitedly and asked what the man would do if he didn't apologize. The guy kept getting closer and closer to the nervous man, asking him to hit him quickly. And the bandit decided the guy was crazy. The men hurried away, and Xiaobai regretted not having fought. White Tiger told him to be less insistent next time. The guy took out a bag of money and said that at least they got some silver coins. The patrolman returned and started shouting, asking the guy not to leave the spot, and now he would go and clean up the toilets. Xiaobai pulled a coin out of his bag and asked if it was silver. The patrolman began to mock the boy. But he saw a bunch of gold coins pouring out of the bag and couldn't believe that the guy had that kind of money. Xiaobai noticed that the color of the coins was not silver at all and was worried that the money would not work. But the patrolman began to smile and explain that one zlotnik was worth 100 pieces of silver. The man decided that Xiaobai was simply pretending to be poor, and the boy was holding a pile of coins in his hands and supported this theory. Xiaobai gave the patrolman one zlotnik and said that he was paying for cleaning the toilet. The patrolman offered to escort him to the registration point, but Xiaobai was suspicious of the men. These were the two who had behaved rudely with the girl and were now standing suspiciously near one of the buildings. The patrolman frowned and decided that these were the bandits who had escaped, and the guy confirmed that they needed to be searched. The man peeked around the corner and told his partner that he didn't have to worry and that they wouldn't miss anyone. A patrolman approached them and asked the young men to show their badges. The men became nervous, but they quickly collected their thoughts, and the man in the hat began rummaging through his pockets to provide their badges. However, he noticed that he could not find anything in his pockets and realized that they were in big trouble. The man in the hat shouted that both badges should disappear and that they had no money either. The patrolman didn't believe them and said that they looked like ordinary bandits, not peaceful citizens. They detained the man even longer and tried to convince him that they were absolutely ordinary people. But the patrolman couldn't convince them. The bandits looked at each other and realized that they should under no circumstances go on a search. So they made a decision and went on the run, and the patrolman began to chase them and try to catch them. The men were forced to stop when a beam of light flashed over their heads with tremendous force and speed. A small but quite powerful explosion occurred in the area where this beam of light landed. The patrolman was delighted when he saw this and realized that it was Lord Harris himself who had arrived. Lord Harris stood on the roof of one of the towers, and his knights were next to him. Local residents were overjoyed to see the leader of the Swordsmen's Association, Yulan Delu. Lord Harris and his knights neutralized the bandits, and the patrolman knelt before him, greeting the Lord. Lord Harris asked if they had found the sword god. The patrolman reported that no leads had been found. The man nodded and thought that the sword god would definitely decide to go through this city first. They needed to intercept him first. Lord Harris ordered the search to continue and went to the building of the Swordsmen's Association. The patrol turned to Xiao Bai but found that he was no longer there and asked where he had gone. Xiao Bai held 2 badges in his hands and thought they needed to ask someone about their level. The white tiger really wanted to take on his normal form, but the boy said that he would scare all the villagers. Suddenly, Xiao Bai felt the presence of his master very close and realized that he had found him. The boy was so happy that he accidentally threw Meow Meow off his shoulder when he started calling for the master. Lord Harris was led into a private room. The man appeared in the doorway, accompanied by other knights. Master Basheng was already sitting inside the room, drinking tea and glad someone had arrived. The men took out their swords and blocked Lord Harris and "Who is this old man?" But Harris stopped them and asked to be left alone. His defense attorneys were unsure whether to do so. Lord Harris said that this man was the strongest swordsman at the moment and asked them not to even think about engaging in battle. The man couldn't believe that the old man in front of him was actually the strongest sword saint. Basheng said he could no longer be called the strongest. But Harris said they wouldn't acknowledge the sword god until they saw him. Master Basheng said that he knew that Harris wanted Xiao Bai to help him and advised him not to involve him in the association's affairs. Lord Harris froze in place and looked at Master Basheng in surprise. The old man didn't understand what had happened. Lord Harris grabbed his head and shouted that he was sure the guy's name was Ye Xiaohei, not Xiao Bai. Harpus stood up and nervously called for the servant to come over, but the old master ordered the man to sit down. Basheng said seriously that he had heard enough, and now they needed to talk about more important matters. Basheng told Guan Yu that this directly affected Ye Xiaobai's life. The man was very worried. Master Basheng walked through the snow-capped mountains, drinking alcohol and singing various songs. But he had to stop when he heard something very similar to a child's cry. At first the man thought he was imagining it, but the crying sounded again, and he realized that the child was nearby. He moved closer to see the child, wondering how a baby could have ended up in such a place. The little bundle lay on a stone, and fire dragons flew above it, warming the baby with their heat. Master Basheng looked at the fiery figures and was very surprised. He had never seen children do anything like that before. The man remembered that he was quite drunk and shook his head in an attempt to drive away the illusion. But this didn't help improve the situation, and it became even worse than before. And the man couldn't believe his eyes. Instead of fiery dragons above the baby, there were now silhouettes of people who protected the child. Master Basheng was very surprised and speechless at the sight of such events, so he froze for a moment. The man fell to the ground and lost consciousness. His bottle of alcohol flew away from him. Through the darkness, Basheng heard someone addressing him as the sword saint and saw a woman's legs. The girl came closer to him. She was very beautiful and felt like something magical. She asked to take the child into custody, and she would definitely return to the boy one day. The man was still unconscious, but he could clearly hear the girl asking him to give her a lift. Old man Basheng drank tea and said that since then he had not touched a drop of alcohol. Lord Harris asked the old man if he was sure that he had not imagined it and that it had really happened. The old man said he wasn't sure about it, but even after so many years he still remembered her voice and waited for her to return. Xiao Bai spent 10 years cultivating in the mountains, and now the student has surpassed the teacher and must move on. Basheng said that Xiao Bai was invincible at this stage and ordered that they not touch him until he found that woman. Lord Harris smiled awkwardly and began to lie that he hadn't even intended to when the master abruptly threw the cup onto the table. He stood up and started running to the window. Harris asked what had happened, and the old man replied that he had been sitting for too long. Master Basheng said goodbye and jumped out the window. Lord Harris watched in shock as the man left the room. The next second, a terrible crash echoed behind Harris. Xiao Bai crashed through the floor and into the room. The guy felt that the master was here and started shouting for him to come out immediately. Xiao Bai promised to treat the master to some mapo tofu and looked for him in every corner of the small room, ignoring the lord. The man watched the boy and couldn't believe that he was able to see the sword god so soon. Xiao Bai gave Meow Meow a cup and ordered him to track the master by smell because they had to find him. The man thought that Xiao Bai was still a child, but he decided not to waste time and quickly adapted to the situation. Lord Harris acted kindly, but he himself was thinking about how he could move freely around the world with its help. Xiaobai looked at the man in surprise, only now noticing that there was someone else in the room with him. The guy realized that the master had escaped through the window and was about to follow him, but the man grabbed him by the clothes. He asked Xiaobai to stop, and the boy was surprised that this man knew his name. The man said that he had to convey a message from the master to the guy and suggested discussing everything over a cup of tea. Harris sat at the table and said that the master believed that the time had come for him to develop independently. Xiaobai started crying because the master had truly abandoned him, and Harris said they'd see each other again. The man then awkwardly asked why the boy ignored him when he said hello. Xiaobai listened to the question and thought about the answer for a second, and then explained his reason. The guy said the master had previously asked him to stay away from Harris. The man asked how he knew it was him. Xiaobai said the man fit the description, blonde with a creepy look, who never shaved his mustache. Then the guy remembered that he never received his badge and asked if the man could help him. Lord Harris agreed to help with the registration and produced a small white crystal. He placed it on the table. He asked Xiaobai to infuse him with some internal energy. The boy reached for the crystal. Xiaobai did as Lord Harris asked, but the crystal began to glow suspiciously brightly, and then it exploded, shattering a window and a chunk of the wall. The explosion was incredibly loud, and all the birds quickly flew away. Meow meow, Xiaobai and Harris sat in silence, trying to recover from the recent explosion. Xiaobai became angry and told the man that the master was right and that he could not be trusted or relied upon for help. The man tried to justify himself and said that the crystal was too weak and could not withstand his energy. Then Harris brought another, most powerful crystal, and said that it was called Yurong. The crystal glowed depending on the person's level, and when the sword god touched it, it turned bright red. Xiaobai asked if he could keep his level a secret. The man advised him to reduce the energy flow. The crystal began to glow yellow, indicating that the man wielded the sword at the 7th level. Xiaobai said that he needed to go even lower and weakened his energy flow to the green crystal color, which meant the 4th level. But even so, it was too much, and the guy continued to reduce the flow of his internal energy. He was pleased when the crystal turned white, and Harris couldn't believe the guy wanted to be a level 1 swordsman. Xiaobai was happy and pointed to his white badge, but the man didn't understand how he could want to pretend to be a newbie. After this, Xiaobai stood up from his seat, bowed and said goodbye to the man. The boy was about to leave through the window when the man stopped him again. Xiaobai asked what else the man wanted from him, and Harris suggested that Xiaobai find out the nature of his power, since the man really wanted to keep him close to him. The guy wanted to test the sword, but the man said that if he uses it constantly, the characteristics will be similar. Xiaobai agreed to test the nature of his power and reached out to the small ball that Harris had brought. The man said they would now see how strong he was, and the magic ball began its work. All matter in their world was divided into 7 different categories, or elements: fire, earth, and ice. There were also elements such as air, lightning, light, and darkness. Every person was a carrier of an element. Elements can enter into various reactions with each other, even to the point of mutual destruction. Many compare swordsmen by strength, evaluating not their skills, but their belonging to one category or another. Harris believed this approach was wrong because, despite his rare element, he worked hard to achieve success. The man told Xiaobai that the test results wouldn't change his strength. The boy began to worry. He asked if the ball was broken since it wasn't changing color. Harris became very nervous. The man took the ball and said that it could not have broken because it was an important relic. Harris tested the ball on himself, and it changed color. Xiaobai asked why it wasn't working on him. The man became worried and asked if it was possible that the guy did not have control over any of the elements. Xiaobai was very surprised and asked if it was even possible for someone not to have an element. Harris grabbed the boy by the hand and told him that he had to enroll in his academy so that they could evaluate his abilities. Xiaobai didn't understand where he should enroll, so the man told him about his Eldian Swordsmanship Academy. Xiaobai decided that they shouldn't go to the magicians since the master was trying to hide from them and asked Meow Meow if they should go to the swordsman. The white tiger liked the idea. There was a sign on the road indicating the direction of the academies. Master Basheng stood at a crossroads and was sure that his student would never figure out where he was going. In reality, the man was heading to the Eldian Swordsman Academy, and he was pleased with his cunning plan. The old man ran along the road that led to the Swordsman's Academy, confident that he would never be found. Xiaobai took the kitten from the table and said it was time for him to go. The man wanted to know if the boy would join them. The guy pointed at his badge in surprise and asked if he hadn't already done that. It turned out that he simply registered, but Harris offered to become an honorary elder of the Swordsmen's Alliance. At first the guy was happy, but then he realized that the man was not just offering this and wanted something from him. Lord Harris admitted that he would like to enlist Ye Xiaobai's support in case of emergency. The boy and the white tiger's expression darkened because it was clear that this man wanted to use them. Harris immediately backed down and said Xiaobai had every right to refuse. But now the boy knew the truth. Xiaobai smiled and said that he was expecting something more difficult, so the man could count on him. Lord Harris burst into tears of happiness and thought that the old man and the dwarf-like king would now be afraid of him. The man was very happy that he was able to find such a strong protector of the Swordsmen's Association. Xiaobai tried to leave again, but the man asked if he would like to go to the Eldian Swordsman Academy. The guy said he'd come by later because he was going to the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce to meet someone. Lord Harris was shocked and asked when this guy had managed to meet the people from Luo. Xiaobai didn't know who the man was talking about, and Harris was glad Mitchell wouldn't take his loot. Harris said he wanted to give the boy one more piece of advice before he left. He began doodling on a piece of paper. The man then showed a portrait of Ariana's grandfather and ordered Xiaobai not to trust him under any circumstances. The boy noticed that the man looked suspicious. Harris said the old man was a bitter, vile curmudgeon. Xiaobai finally came out of the building and told Meow Meow that he was very hungry and they were interested in trying the local food. And since there was only one way to find out the answer to this question, Xiaobai and the white tiger ran to look for a cafe. On every street they came across mages and swordsmen, and the boy became curious about why there were so many of them. The white tiger said that a secret dimension had recently been discovered, so all the powerful people had gathered here, waiting for the opening. The boy was thinking about his friend's words and was about to move on when someone called his name. When they turned around, they saw that the man Lord Harris had asked them to stay away from was calling them. Xiaobai immediately remembered all the bad words the Lord had said about the man and didn't know what to do. The guy decided to say he saw the right store on the other side and left. But the man ran after him. Mitchell Rodriguez introduced himself and said that he was the head of the Chamber of Commerce and asked the guy not to run away. The guy stopped and remembered that Ariana's grandfather was the head of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce. The man confirmed this guess. The white tiger decided that the man was lying because the head of the first Chamber of Commerce at the market was a suspicious guest. The boy asked the man to prove his identity, but Rodriguez said he had forgotten his badge because he was in a hurry. And then he said that he could prove it by walking into any establishment and they wouldn't charge him a penny. Xiaobai was delighted and asked if this meant he could eat as much food as he wanted for free. Rodriguez confirmed his guess, and Xiaobai grabbed the man to take him to one of the cafes. On one of the streets, a girl with a crab-shaped hat was carrying a tray of boiled lobster. This restaurant was the most expensive, and Xiaobai greedily ate one lobster after another. Mitchell Rodriguez said nervously that this is one of the advantages of being powerful. Some people will never be able to afford it. Xiaobai continued eating and asked if the food would definitely be free because he didn't have enough money to pay. Rodriguez snapped his fingers and called Xiao Er over to their table to calm Ye Xiaobai down. The girl ran up to them happily and said that their dinner cost 112 pieces of silver. Mitchell Rodriguez asked if she didn't know who he was to tell him to pay the bill. The girl folded her arms across her chest and said that thousands of people visit their restaurant, and she cannot remember everyone. The man pointed to his face and said he was the head of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce. The girl turned away and told the boss that another Rodriguez had arrived and he wasn't going to pay. The door opened and the establishment's chef appeared in the guest room. He strode loudly toward the table. The boss turned out to be a huge man who was flexing his fists and talking about how the Rodriguezes had gotten on his nerves. The man looked menacingly at the old man and said that for deceiving him, he would send him to the crayfish as food. The boss leaned toward Rodriguez and told the old man to pay immediately, or he'd regret it. Mitchell hesitantly asked him to step away. But the chef wasn't going to listen. He was furious and slammed his fist into the old man's plate. Then he turned the table over and began accusing the man of pretending to be an aristocrat. Xiaobai picked up the plates of food and continued eating, watching the commotion. Meow Meow couldn't understand how the boy kept eating. The other guests began to support the chef and reproached the stranger for eating at Mitchell's royal restaurant for free. The old man realized the situation was getting out of control and decided he needed to do something. Mitchell Rodriguez decided to try to scare everyone present with the help of his magic. The restaurant chef immediately became frightened and began to retreat when he saw that the old man was about to use some kind of spell. The waiter and the restaurant guests saw the man using magic and realized that he really was a magician. Rodriguez raised the ball of light and a seal formed around it. He asked how they dared doubt him. The restaurant chef fell to his knees and began begging the old man to spare him. But Rodriguez wanted him to sound more confident. Xiaobai shouted and ordered Rodriguez to stop. The men looked at the boy expectantly. The restaurant patrons and the waitress also looked at Xiaobai attentively and waited for his next move. The guy wiped the table with a napkin and said he hated hiccups. Xiaobai finally finished his dinner. So he stood up from his chair and lifted the boss off his knees. Then he said it was all Rodriguez's fault. The boy told the boss not to be upset and said he'd pay for dinner himself. The man cried and thanked Xiaobai. The old man watched in confusion as the boy took out the money, but the restaurant chef refused to take it. One of the men told the waitress that the chef was still as sensitive as ever. The girl was surprised that the old man turned out to be a magician. Mitchell Rodriguez was disappointed because he didn't get to try a single bite of the restaurant's food. When they left, Xiaobai said it was hard to see how everyone knew him here. But the old man said he was just unlucky. He suggested going to the Chamber of Commerce to clear up any doubts the boy had. Xiaobai agreed. They went to the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce, where a treasure auction was taking place. There was a huge line outside the building. Xiaobai was surprised by the huge crowd. Rodriguez explained that the annual auction was taking place today, but they were welcome to enter immediately. There were 2 girls in bunny costumes at the entrance. They let people in and asked them to prepare their payment in advance. Mitchell appeared next to the girls and coughed to get their attention. The man asked how sales were going, and the girls said that they still had enough tickets, so everything was fine. There was an awkward silence after that, and people in line looked at Rodriguez with disapproval. Mitchell asked the girl if she recognized him. But neither the girls nor the visitors knew who he was. It was a shock to the old man, and he thought that the dead are remembered forever, but the living are not remembered. The men decided that the old man was pestering girls and decided that they could teach him a lesson. Xiaobai smiled at the men and said that the old man simply wanted to cut in line and was not bothering the girls. These words angered every person who stood in the long line, and now everyone wanted to teach the old man a lesson. The men began to criticize him for his hooliganism, and Mitchell Rodriguez tried to explain to them who he was. But he couldn't even introduce himself because a brick thrown by an angry crowd hit him in the face. The men attacked the old man with their fists and said that even if the head of the chamber had come, he should have respect. When the men calmed down and the dust cleared, they saw that the old man was no longer in his former place. A group of guys started looking around in an attempt to find the impudent old man, but they were unsuccessful. Xiaobai took the man from the center of the fight and led him away from the angry people. The man said he was fine and tried to get up, but blood began to flow from his eyes and mouth. Mitchell fell to the floor, and Xiaobai said the man definitely had internal injuries. The door next to them opened, and Ariana saw Xiaobai sitting next to her grandfather on the street. She was very happy when she saw Xiaobai and asked what he was doing there. The boy turned to the girl and called her Eliana, and the grandfather was badly wounded, so he also repeated this name. Ariana saw her grandfather bleeding and ran to him, asking what had happened. The man grabbed the girl by the shoulders and asked his granddaughter to tell him who he was and to state his name. Ariana didn't understand what was going on, but she said that he was Mitchell Rodriguez, the head of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce. She asked if everything was okay, but her grandfather was already dancing with happiness right in the middle of the street. The man laughed so hard that tears started to flow, but he still did not stop. Xiaobai heard his friend's words and could now be sure that the man was indeed the boss. The boy apologized for his doubts. Rodriguez threw himself into his granddaughter's arms and complained that no one recognized him. Xiaobai and Ariana were strolling around the city. Ariana offered to let him go in for something to eat, but he declined. Ariana noticed a kitten on the guy's head and asked if it was really a white tiger from the underworld. Xiaobai winked at her and told her she was right. The girl looked at Meow Meow and said that the tiger was very rare. And Meow Meow felt uncomfortable with these words. The guy didn't participate in their conversation and then grabbed Ariana's hand and dragged her into the alley. They ran quickly down the alley, and the girl asked the guy what happened and why they were running away. Xiaobai remembered the people's looks and told the girl about them, and then asked if they might know him. Tiger said the Swordsmen's Association had received posters with his face on them, so they were keeping an eye on him. The boy was very upset. Ariana said she had one way to help a guy stay unnoticed. Meow Meow and Xiaobai turned to the girl with interest and were ready to take advantage of her idea. Ariana was pleased with her work and shouted that no one would ever guess who he was. Xiaobai was dressed in women's clothing and wore a wig. The girl said no one would think the sword god was wearing women's clothing. The guy asked if they would get into trouble, but Ariana was already pushing him towards the exit and saying that everything would be fine. A crowd of people gathered near the arch with a beautiful statue of horses on top. This arch marked the beginning of the sacred city of Ilias. Armed guards stood along the walls of the arched passage, lending it even greater grandeur. The girls watched the handsome man with loving eyes and discussed how good he was. Today, the handsome prince of the Temple of Light arrived in the sacred city of Ilias. He rode a white horse and waved to the citizens. The prince's name was Shulin, and every girl knew he was single. So his appearance evoked a lot of emotion. The white tiger settled between Ariana's breasts and enjoyed his new surroundings, and the girl asked him discontentedly how long he would sit there. And Xiaobai watched as the stranger's chest shook. And then Xiaobai sadly asked why his chest wasn't shaking like that. And Ariana screamed that it was because there were apples in there. Girls running past them called out to Mr. Shulan. The girls looked to see where they were running so quickly. The girls asked for autographs. They gave the prince a huge number of flowers and simply surrounded him. Ariana turned away and called the prince a narcissist. Xiaobai was surprised and asked if Ariana knew the prince. The girl said that Xuding was the main heir to the Temple of Light and the youngest sword emperor in history. That's why Xulin was always popular. Ariana turned away and asked him to leave quickly before they were noticed. But their plan didn't work out because the rose Xulin had thrown to her started falling right in front of Ariana. The girl turned around and asked if fame had really gone to the guy's head if he dared to block her path. Xulin said he had accidentally angered Lady Mitchell. He apologized, saying his hand had simply trembled. But there was something that interested Xulin. That's why he didn't let the girls leave. The young man threw a rose at Xiaobai and asked what this beautiful lady's name was. The young man stood there with the rose in his hair, confused. The girls saw Xulin flirting with another girl and felt anger and despair. Ariana looked at Xiaobai and couldn't understand how something like this could happen to them. The guy reached for the rose, and the girls continued to find fault with it and judge it. Xulin dismounted from his horse and said that only this girl had caught his eye, and he was flying towards the light like a moth. Xiaobai remembered Ariana telling him to keep his mouth shut because his voice remained masculine. He turned to Ariana when he saw the prince approaching and began to mentally scream for the girl to help him. But the white tiger and Ariana ate watermelon and mentally told the guy that he could handle it on his own. Xulin came close and pulled Xiaobai towards him by the waist. Then he said she was too beautiful. Ariana and Meow Meow choked on their watermelon when Prince Xulin called the guy too handsome. The girls cried with indignation and did not understand why Prince Xulin was trying to seduce such a scarecrow. The guy pressed Xiaobai's body to himself and thought about how her breasts were firm and round, like apples. He thought about how this was exactly what he'd been searching for all his life. And he imagined how he could press himself against her chest without any extra fabric. The prince touched the stranger's cheek and thought that since sweet words and hugs were not working, it was time to use a secret technique. Ariana and Meow Meow trembled with impatience and completely forgot that they wanted to eat watermelon. And Xulin began to lean closer to the disguised Xiaobai, continuing to press his body to himself. They looked into each other's eyes, and their noses almost touched, so close were their faces. Xiaobai covered the stranger's mouth with his hand, frowned, and ordered them to stop approaching him. Ariana and Meow Meow let out a sad sigh and were very upset that Xiaobai was not kissed. But the girls, on the contrary, were very glad that the stranger stopped Prince Xulin. The prince said that he never even thought that there were girls left who could resist him. He wanted to say that the girl had struck him, but then he realized something was wrong with her voice. Xiaobai broke free from the other man's grasp. He looked menacingly at Xulin and told him that he was a man, so the prince should keep his hands to himself. Prince Xulin felt humiliated and deceived when he learned that the beauty turned out to be a man. And the girls were now even more upset than before when they realized that they had lost to the guy. Xiaobai took out the apples and said that he would go change his clothes if the guy had finished his games. Prince Shulin was furious. Xiaobai had humiliated the heir to the Temple of Light, and now he was simply running away. He took out his sword and used a technique where a huge knight appeared behind the blade of the sword. The ground around the prince began to fly apart, and he screamed for the boy to come back immediately. Ariana became agitated and shouted at Prince Shulin to pull himself together immediately. But the girl's scream had no effect, and Shulin attacked the departing guy, and the huge knight did the same. Xiaobai had a dark sword with him, so he was able to stop the other man's strike without even turning around. Xiaobai glared at Shulin over his shoulder, continuing to defend himself with one hand against the other's sword. Afterwards, he told Prince Shulin to remember that he was the one who attacked him first. Shulin was shocked because this guy was able to stop his strongest punch with one hand. Xiaobai turned to Shulin fully and said he was ready to have fun. But the prince recognized the sword. Now he was at a loss as he pointed at the guy's sword and started shouting that it was Ye Xiaobai in front of him. Xiaobai was surprised and asked how Shulin knew his real name. The boy himself didn't remember the prince. Ariana and the white tiger were also confused when it turned out that the two knew each other. Meanwhile, the weather outside was beautiful, but the area around the Mitchell's room was deserted. Inside, Mitchell Rodriguez greeted the High Bishop of the Temple of Light and asked why he was there. It turned out that the man, too, could not ignore the discovery of a secret dimension. Mitchell Rodriguez laughed, thinking that the news about Ye Xiaobai had not yet reached the Temple of Light. The bishop believed that at the time of the opening, all the forces should be in the city, and it was unknown whether the old man would come from the mountain. Mitchell asked why the man remembered him. The bishop replied that, although many years had passed, their feud was not over. Rodriguez decided to take the chance and asked what exactly had happened between them. The bishop explained that 10 years ago, he and Shulin had climbed the mountains. Shulin had just become the sword emperor. They were sitting at the table, and the man told the master to call his student so that the boys could fight. The master called Xiaobai. The bishop regretted taking Shulin with him to the mountains. Xiaobai left the house when he heard the master calling him and looked out uncertainly. The boy was cooking and asking what had happened. The second thing the bishop regretted was that he had allowed them to fight. Young Shulin asked Xiaobai to remember his name because it would be an honor for the boy to fight him. Ye Xiaobai wiped his hands on his apron and asked them to fight quickly because his potatoes were burning. Shulin told the boy to take the sword and under no circumstances dirty his weapon with the greasy spatula. Ye Xiaobai came closer and said she wasn't fat at all. The boy started shaking the spatula and stained the other boy's shirt. Shulin was furious when he realized that his clothes now had grease stains on them. The men watched the children, and the bishop said that with the spatula, the boy looked like a chef. The guy apologized to Shulin and tried to wipe off the greasy stains with his hand, but it didn't work well. Xiaobai's hand only rubbed the stains into huge ones, and now the entire shirt was completely ruined by grease. Xiaobai said he would try to wet his hands and remove the stains, but he shouted louder for the boy to take the sword. The boy came with a sword and asked Shulin to take off his shirt to clean it and then fight. But Shulin was already attacking Xiaobai and shouting at the boy to forget about his dirty clothes. Xiaobai turned to his master uncertainly to see what he should do. Master Basheng winked at his student and told him to show what he could do. Now Ye Xiaobai was filled with confidence. He gripped the sword with both hands and concentrated his spiritual energy. Then, during the fight, he released a lot of his spiritual power, illuminating the mountains. In that battle, Prince Shulin quickly lost, and all his clothes were torn after their duel. Now Shulin was an adult, but he waited a full 3,532 days for the opportunity to fight again. After these words, Xiaobai finally remembered the guy. He was the crying ghost. The girls were shocked because the prince's autobiography said that he never cried. Then Xiaobai reminded him of how the boy had wet his pants and been forced to clean up. Shulin was incredibly angry. Much time has passed since then, and Prince Shulin has been constantly training with heavy weights. The guy trained his body in the water and spent a lot of time with dolphins and could swim faster than them. In addition, Shulin did not forget to include running through the dark forest in his training. He could also calmly leave the girl alone in bed and leave, despite the fact that he was being called. Prince Shulin shouted that he was no longer the same little boy and jumped on Xiaobai to attack from above. Xiaobai didn't understand what the problem was and why Shulin was so angry if he was telling the truth. White Tiger and Ariana were very worried about the boy. The girl shouted at Xiaobai to dodge the other man's attack. The guy looked at his opponent and saw that he was quickly approaching him. Shulin flew at the boy, but all his anger disappeared as his head was filled with memories of the past battle. He remembered very clearly and vividly the moment when Xiaobai's spiritual power had thrown him back, tearing his clothes. These memories made the prince feel like that pathetic boy again, and tears appeared in his eyes. Xiaobai took a step to the side, and Prince Shulin fell flat on his face next to his feet, dropping his sword. Xiaobai looked at the unconscious prince and said he hadn't even done anything. Ariana assumed the prince was overexcited. At this moment, the guards appeared and saw that someone dared to harm Prince Shulin. Xiaobai wanted to explain that he had done nothing, but Ariana said it was useless. The girl ran forward and used her fire magic. Then she forbade the guards from approaching. There was a small beam of flame in front of the men, but none of the guards were harmed by it. When the fire and smoke cleared, the men became agitated and noticed that there was no one in front of them. There wasn't a single girl on the road, and Prince Shulin was missing. No one saw where they disappeared to. They ran away, and Xiaobai asked why they had taken the prince. Ariana said they should be friends to avoid trouble. The girl turned around in confusion to ask Xiaobai what that strange sound was, and she saw Xiaobai simply dragging Shulin's body along the floor. Xiaobai couldn't understand why the girl was looking at him like that. Due to the careless way the body was transported, Julin suffered numerous injuries, and they lost their chance for peace talks. They stood next to the prince's bed, and Xiaobai said that he didn't think and simply grabbed him as the girl asked. Their quarrel was interrupted by the sound of the door opening and two men who came to check on Shulin. The bishop of the Temple of Light pressed his face against Shulin's wounded face and cried, asking how this had happened to him. Mitchell Rodriguez approached his granddaughter and asked what had happened. Ariana sighed and said it was a misunderstanding. The man listened to the girl and said that he was almost certain that they would not be able to resolve everything peacefully. Ye Xiaobai approached the bishop and bowed. The young man apologized and said it was all his fault. The man was furious and was ready to tear Xiaobai into little pieces for what he did to the prince. The man wanted to teach the little rascal a lesson and lunged at Xiaobai with his fists. The boy remained standing. Mitchell shouted at the man that he did not advise him to act rashly because Ye Xiaobai, the sword god. The bishop froze in front of the boy. He considered the new information about Ye Xiaobai's title and decided not to get into a fight. The man took Xiaobai's hands and said they hadn't seen each other in a long time. The boy didn't remember ever knowing the man. The man said he was a close friend of his master, and the Mitchell family could breathe a sigh of relief for a moment. A maid appeared in the room, called Mitchell Rodriguez, and said that the top brass of the Magicians Association had arrived. Rodriguez said he had important guests awaiting him, but he'd like to introduce Xiaobai to them, and the man said goodbye to the young man. The Mitchells and Xiaobai headed out of the room, the man waving kindly after them. When the group left and the doors closed behind them, the man dropped his friendliness. The bishop became absolutely serious and thought about his next steps, because Xiaobai was now the god of the sword. He turned to Shulin and asked why he was picking a fight with someone much stronger than him. The man smiled and said that such an opponent could not be defeated by force, so they would have to find some kind of loophole. Xiaobai walked down the corridor. Meow Meow sat on his head, and they admired the beautiful view from the window. Mitchell Rodriguez asked his granddaughter to keep a close eye on Xiaobai and not allow him to talk to anyone. Ariana asked why, but no one answered because they were distracted by a pink light near the building. A huge beam of pink energy shot into the sky, and its source was in the forest near the mountain. Ariana was very happy and asked her grandfather if it was what she thought it was. And Mitchell Rodriguez said that the girl was right, and right now, before their eyes, a secret dimension was opening up. Every 1,000 years, secret dimensions open up on the Yulan continent, and a pink beam of light shoots into the sky. In the secret dimensions, you can find various artifacts, such as stones, minerals, herbs, or weapons. Anyone who enters the secret dimension has a chance to gain power and glory, so it was a very popular event. Places like these always attract people who strive for success and new heights. People are running to the place where the passage to the secret dimension opens in huge numbers, and everyone dreams of power. The guy almost reached the entrance to the secret dimension and joyfully shouted that he would be the first one to get there. This man had dreamed of becoming a sword god all his life and was now sure that it would happen. But the next second, the guy's skeleton returned from the other side, scaring the rest of the interested parties. Lord Harris said that the dimension had not yet opened, and anyone who rushed into it would immediately lose their life. Jin Li, the king of the dwarves, also came. He said he would quickly deal with all the petty competitors. Eston was the king of the elves. He said that all these people would be used as cannon fodder, and only a few would survive. Jinli turned towards the sound of the voice and saw many other elves standing next to the king. The dwarf king said he was annoyed by Eston's constant presence. The elf suggested a fight before the dimension opened. Mitchell Rodriguez said it would look ugly, but kings should still look dignified. Ordinary people realized that the entire top brass of the Sacred Council had gathered and were extremely serious. Lord Harris pointed to Mitchell and said he thought he had lost some of his men. The man said that he was fine and that he already had suitable help nearby. Lord Harris hoped the man didn't mean Xiaobai, and Jinli said that only his warriors could help the old man. Mitchell Rodriguez shouted and introduced his future son-in-law. Firecracker-wielding warriors surrounded Ariana and Xiaobai. Lord Harrison was about to cry when he saw Ye Xiaobai go to help Mitchell Rodriguez. Jinli saw the guy had a white badge and laughed. Eston chuckled too and said the guy didn't look like he was smart. Ariana was very embarrassed and started pulling her grandfather's mustache and saying that Xiaobai was not his son-in-law. Rodriguez said he might one day become one when someone shouted out that they were against the relationship. This man turned out to be the city's prince, Elias. Esteko claimed that Ariana belonged solely to him. The girl felt irritated. She closed her eyes and told Estek that he didn't belong here. But Esteko said that this was still Elias's territory, which meant he had every right to be here. Prince Eliasa approached Xiaobai and told him that everyone here was obliged to obey his orders. But Ye Xiaobai didn't pay attention to the guy and noticed that something strange was happening in the sky, as if it was about to rain. Esteko got very angry and started shouting that the guy had no right to ignore him and should get out of there. Dark clouds in the sky thickened, and soon lightning appeared accompanied by thunder. Jinli gripped his axe tighter and asked if the demon god would really appear soon. Eston ordered everyone to take positions. There were more and more lightning flashes in the sky, and it was impossible to see even a small piece of sky through the clouds. And then the sacred beasts appeared. The black dragon said that the secret dimension belonged to the dragon god. A phoenix, a leopard, and a snake appeared on the clouds nearby. The dragon warned the people not to venture into the secret dimension. Mitchell was worried and confused when the dragon god returned to their world. Harris, however, noted that the chi was very powerful. Soon the clouds began to part, and the dragon god said that he did not want to kill the weak insects. People watched in horror as the silhouette of the dragon god appeared in the sky among the lightning and clouds. Lao Chu emerged completely from the clouds and told the people that he was giving them one last chance to escape without being harmed. The man looked down menacingly. The number of lightning bolts near him increased, and he ordered the people to run. People began to retreat, and the man was glad that everything was going according to plan, and that only such a performance could announce a return. Estek screamed in horror and clutched his head. Xiaobai stared intently at the dragon god. Lao Chu also noticed his gaze, and it felt as if his soul had rushed to leave his body. The dragon god did not want to engage in a duel with the sword god, because he did not want to lose in front of everyone. He hurried back through the portal from the clouds and ordered the rest of the sacred animals to leave immediately. The black dragon decided that the dragon god was embarrassed by the humans. It was therefore difficult for him to speak, and the dragon decided to help. Now Xiaobai pointed at the sacred beasts and wanted to say something, but didn't have time. Because all four sacred beasts felt their souls leaving their bodies in fear. And in order not to be near the god of the sword, they quickly obeyed the order of their god and hid in the portal. Mitchell was surprised that the dragon god was finally free, but for some reason decided to leave quickly. Jinli asked if the others had seen the change in the dragon god's expression. Eston said he had looked in Xiaobai's direction. Everyone turned their attention to the place where Xiaobai and the prince of the sacred city of Elias stood. Estek noticed the increased attention to their persons when he recovered from his fright and asked what was the matter. Xiaobai started clapping and said that everyone thought the prince had driven away that terrifying god. The boy was at a loss at first. And then he laughed loudly and proudly declared that he was the prince of the holy city of Elias, and that nothing could frighten him. Eston and Jinli appreciated how Xiaobai focused all his attention on Esteko and decided the boy would be up to the challenge. Eston ordered one of his subordinates to keep an eye on Xiaobai once they were in the dungeon. Jinli also approached one of his dwarves and told him to keep a close eye on the boy. Finally, someone shouted that the portal to the secret dimension was opening. Everyone felt a thrill of anticipation. A seal appeared on the ground, meaning that the entrance was completely open and everyone hurried inside. Crowds of people ran into the pink beam of light and immediately disappeared. Everyone wanted to get into the dungeon as quickly as possible. Estek approached Ariana and offered to lead the girl to the entrance to the secret dimension. But the girl said she didn't need his protection. She took Xiaobai's hand, and she and the white tiger walked ahead. Estek was hurt and could barely hold back his tears. He thought about how he would deal with the guy right then and there. Jin Li and Lord Harris led their soldiers towards the entrance to the secret dimension. The bandits who had been robbed by Xiaobai in the city earlier also came to the place where the secret dimension had opened. The man suggested taking a shower first, but his partner yelled at him for such a stupid idea and reminded him of the Dark Lord. The bandit said that the Dark Lord gave them a simple task. They just had to keep a close eye on the guy. The bandit hoped that his partner would cope with this, but people continued to enter the portal. The story begins with the previous sword god of the Yulan continent, saying that he succeeded because he put in 99% effort. The protagonist's name was Ye Xiaobai. He was turning 16 this year, and his cultivation had reached rank 8.